If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Halfway up the red stone mountain, Yuan Kangtai lowered his head, stared at the wood on the stump, held the stake with his left hand, took a sharp breath, and collapsed his lungs slightly, exhaling this breath at the same time he cut it down with a knife in his right hand, and the round and thick wood seemed to be passed through by a light, snapped, and broke into two sections. Yuan Kangtai looked at the smooth plain without a trace of notch, exhaled softly, he threw down the piece of wood, and collided with the pile of wood next to him. A pile of smooth wood that could reflect the sun's rays was piled next to him. This was his masterpiece for a morning. It's been 3 months since he came into this world. Yes, Yuan Kangtai was not originally from this world, and he was a swordsman enthusiast named Li Yi before he crossed over. During an exchange with others, he was hit on the head with a bamboo knife by the person opposite, fainted, and woke up again when he was in this world. Accepting the memory of the original owner, he knew that this was the world that originally belonged to the Demon Slayer blade, and he had little contact with anime before crossing over, and only occasionally heard that others were discussing this phenomenal anime, and he showed a bitter smile. If he had known that something like this would happen to him, he should have dabbled in a little more anime, and he wouldn't not be unable to get useful information now. But he is addicted to swordsmanship, and he will not be unable to survive in this world, and after experiencing the initial helplessness, he still accepts the reality. When he first crossed over to this body, severe pain followed. His eyes were black, and he could only continue to receive the memories of the original owner. He found out that the original owner accidentally fell off the cliff when he went up the mountain to cut down a tree. The protagonist crossed over after he lost his breath. Dragging this body, which had broken many ribs, he limped towards the village he remembered, and it took several months to recover from his injuries. Yuan Kang, who had multiple fractures, was too much thanks to having a sister with superb medical skills, so he was saved from subsequent infections and died at home. Minamisa cried a lot when she picked up her brother, and she saw that there was no good place for her brother. Even thought he couldn't be saved. But she took care of Yuan Kangtai carefully for 3 months, and Yuan Kang was too unbelievably cured. And after so much weakness, the body has unexpectedly become stronger, just like breaking out of a cocoon into a butterfly. Is this a reward for the traverser? Jen Kangtai was puzzled by this. After recovery, Jen Kangtai found that the swordsmanship of his previous life might be realized here one by one. Because he could feel that there was a completely different power system in this world than in his previous life, and he couldn't wait to show those peerless sword skills imprinted in his mind. Jen Kangtai didn't know what kind of danger this world had, and he felt that there was an inexhaustible power in his body. After his sister confirmed that he was really fully recovered, he embarked on a journey of cultivation. Every day, I go up the mountain to chop waterfalls, chop wood, cut stones, and kill wild boars, which are used to exercise the knife skills in my mind. And unexpectedly picked up a seemingly unfinished knife in the center of the lake top of Mt. Kishi, and he used this knife to train himself. After cutting the wood, it was honestly carried home. In the evening, the setting sun slowly sets into the sky, shedding the last of its warmth. Yuan Kangtai glanced up at the sunset that was as red as blood, and felt that it was time to eat. He tied the wood on the ground with a rope and tightened it behind his back. The black knife was placed on the ground, and the blade showed a glass-like quality, which made Yuan Kangtai, who had no way to touch a good sword in the previous world, particularly like it. No way, he didn't want to take a kitchen knife to the mountains to cut down trees, imagining that those peerless knife skills were constantly waved out of his hand by a kitchen knife. The picture was not too beautiful. The whole knife showed a quaint atmosphere in the sunlight, and he picked it up and stuck it in the crack of the wood, and walked down the mountain. When the road is uneven, I roar. When it's time to make a move, I will make a move. Yuan Kangtai hummed a little song from his world as he walked. When he reached the bottom of the mountain, he saw his family's cabin. Cutting down a whole tree made Jen Kangtai sweat all over his body. There was a stream at the foot of the mountain, and he walked slowly to the stream, looking at the clear water, ready to wipe his body. Ah, that's comfortable. As the palm of his hand entered the bottom of the stream, Jen Kangtai let out a groan. He desperately needed cold water to cool his body. His hand was in the stream to feel the cool temperature, but a glimmer of red suddenly appeared on the back of his hand. Hey? Is this bloodshed? Yuan Kangtai looked at his smooth and white palm, but there are no wounds on my hands. Blood grew thicker and thicker, and half of the stream was full, and he felt that something was wrong. He stood up alertly. The muscles of his whole body began to tense, his right hand pressed the hilt of the knife behind him, and the corners of his black clothes swayed in the wind. If there was a master of swordsmanship here at this time, then he would definitely praise Yuan Kangtai as a master of using knives, which was the starting style of drawing swords, and he was vigilant against possible dangers. He followed the stream and looked at the place where it flowed, the village where he lived as a child. Not good. Yuan Kangtai secretly said in his heart, my sister is still there, I don't know what's going on. Yuan Kangtai threw away the wood he was carrying, drew his knife, and hurried to the location of the wooden house. Inside a wooden hut, a beautiful girl who looked a little bigger than Genkang stood behind the door, wearing a pink kimono with a black haori over it, and holding a stick in her hand against the door. Looking at Minamoto's expression, it seemed that she had exhausted all her strength to prevent the thing outside the door from coming in. There was a dull hoarse sound from outside the door, like a fingernail cutting through a gold stone. A humanoid monster stood in front of a wooden door, covered in grey-black skin. Dense scales covered most of its body like armor, and its head sprouted two sharp horns that emitted a piercing chill. The most terrifying thing is that when the mouth opens and closes, you can see that its mouth is full of sharp blades, and blood is constantly dripping downward, and it falls to the ground in a ball. In its right hand it held a human arm, which was mutilated, and it didn't have to think about who had bitten off the missing pieces of flesh. It is precisely because of this that he has the patience to play the game of peekaboo with the girl behind the door. He has eaten enough, and now it is time for him to enjoy playing with his prey. It was going to make the girl behind the door die in despair, so that her flesh would be more palatable. It will also become more powerful. It seems that the stalemate has been going on for some long time, and it feels impatient. He slammed his left arm into the wooden door, and with a bang, the wooden door exploded into a big hole. It stretched out its jaws but didn't see the pretty girl. Minamoto Misa fled to the back room. She closed the wooden door of the back room with a trembling hand, picked up the household knife used to chop wood behind the door, and swung her hands with both hands, but she still tried to hold the knife in her hand. She faced the doorway, her lips white, and her brother's name kept on saying, Mrs. Kang, Mrs. Kang, Mrs. Kang, don't come back. She was determined to die, and she didn't want her brother to die here when he returned. At first, she went to the village with a basket to exchange the wild boar meat that her brother had hunted for a vegetable stew. But no sooner had she reached the village than a shrill scream rang out in the village. She saw a horrible scene. On this bloody ground, bright red blood flows like a river, forming a series of twisted scrolls. The smell of blood and the smell of fish filled the air and was suffocating. An atmosphere of death enveloped the village, and groans of pain rang out incessantly. A human-like monster draped in scales kills everyone in the village. The monster grabbed the screaming girl by the hair, tore off one of her arms, stuffed it into its mouth, and turned to look at Minamisa. Her furious and hideous eyes made her shudder, and she threw down the wild boar that she had brought over to exchange vegetables, stumbling and running back. Sweat wet her hair, slightly obscuring her vision, but she didn't dare to lift her hair. She was afraid that the monster would rush in the next second. She heard the monster's footsteps getting closer. The sound of heavy footsteps was like a demon seeking her life, constantly pounding her heart. Feeling the vibration coming from the doorway, Minamisa took a deep breath and tried to tell herself not to be afraid. As if she had made up her mind, she threw the machete out of her hand so hard that she had never felt her strength so great. The machete passed through the wooden door and threw it at the dark shadow in the doorway. There was no imaginary sound of a machete stabbing into the flesh, and the monster kicked the door open. The machete was in its hand, and it caught it with one hand. Minamisa was desperate. She fell to the ground in horror, and kept moving backwards. Seeing the desperate expression of the prey in front of him made the monster feel very comfortable. It showed a hideous smile and said hoarsely, "Your desperate face before you died is really addictive, this beautiful young lady." It reached out and grabbed the girl. It was tired of the game, and now it was time to enjoy its prey. The black and scaly arms were getting closer and closer to the girl's neckline. Minamisa leaned against the wall and closed her eyes, calmly waiting for her death, tears streaming from the corners of her eyes proving that she was not as calm as she seemed. There was a rush of footsteps outside the house, like a war drum was constantly beating, and something was coming, and Genmisa thought to herself, "Is it another hideous monster?" Boom! With a loud bang, a well-proportioned figure broke through the plank next to Genmisa. A black knife with an indomitable momentum appeared in this space, and it broke the pattern at this time. And its wielder seems to know how to maximize its power. Yuan King completed 2 turns in the air in a dashing manner, carrying a huge amount of kinetic energy added to the black knife, and then pressed down like a heavy object. The purpose of all this was just to cut off the hand that was close to the girl. What a violent thought, with a determination not to cause any harm to one's own family. Even steel is difficult to maintain in its original state in the face of this knife. A white line ran through the scaly arm like a piece of wood. The smooth cut appeared between the severed arms, and the arm fell to the ground splashing black blood, and Gen Souta also fell with the arm, and the black knife pointed straight at the monster that had not yet shown a painful expression. It's like heroes always appear at the last minute, and the only person who can protect Minamoto Misa arrives. Gen Souta hugged Gen Misa, who was huddled in the corner, and the black feather weaving continued to fly in the smoke, and it was only then that the monster realized that his arm had been cut off. Ah! A scream of endless pain rang out in the space. It looked at Yuan Kangtai with red eyes. You damn little ghost! The monster's head was bruised. I'm going to skin you and cramp. Just like in the fantasy story, Gen Kangtai watched as the monster's severed arm began to grow at a speed visible to the naked eye. He looked at this scene with a flat expression, but he had already scolded in his heart. Damn, what is this? The severed hand is still alive. Why don't I have this function? Is this the power of ghosts? Yuan Kangtai began to recall the few words discussed by his roommates. I remember hearing what they discussed at the time. The Ghost King is not miserable. Are these the subordinates of the Ghost King? Gen Kangtai clenched the knife in his hand and looked down at his sister, who had fainted under fear. She unconsciously tugged at Yuan Kangtai's clothes. Gen Kangtai gently stroked her back and gave her some comfort. As if feeling the temperature on her back, Minamoto's wrinkled expression gradually soothed. Yuan Kangtai only completed 1 or 2 small movements on his side, but the ghost over there had already regrown the fallen arm. He looked at the monster with an expressionless face, but had other thoughts in his heart. If you can't kill it by cutting off your arm, then what about cutting off its head? Yuan Kangtai's sharp eyes looked straight at the neck of the ghost, and at this time a qualified hunter stared at his prey. He lifted the knife in his hand slightly, wanting to give it a try for his idea. After the monster repaired his arm, he suddenly felt a biting chill. It's something that hasn't happened in a long time. It was as if it had seen the adult who had given it blood for the first time a long time ago. The adults just glanced at it lightly, and a basin of cold water was splashed on its head. It instantly extinguished its self-confidence, which had skyrocketed because of the power it had gained. And today, in the eyes of a boy, it once again saw the eyes of the adults looking down on all beings. It's been a long time since it became a ghost, and it's been a long time since it's been killed, and the people of a village have boosted its strength a lot. Let it take a step closer to the 12 ghost moons. It imagined the thrill of gaining the blood of that adult again after increasing its strength. There is an expression on his face that is somewhere between hideous and lewd. It suddenly struck, and its scaly fist suddenly smashed into Gen Kangtai, and it suddenly swelled several times on the way. It seems to have unleashed its own blood demon magic. There was a loud boom, and a big hole was smashed out of the wooden board where Yuan Kangtai was standing. Gen Kangtai moved back a distance, avoiding the punch. Although his face was expressionless, the beads of sweat on his head betrayed his true thoughts. I'm. Yuan Kangtai quickly retreated. This punch must not be bruised or purple on the body. Yuan Kangtai hugged his sister and left here quickly. The space was so small that he couldn't exert his full strength. And you have to put your sister in a safe place first, and it's not convenient to take her with yourself, but just a simple dodge can't kill this monster. 3. Watching the monster's arm sink into the wood and not be able to pull it out for the time being, he looked around and observed the safe place, which was a plane tree, on which they used to fight when they were children. The sycamore tree is not too tall, and the branches are a place where people can be placed. Yuan King didn't dare to delay too much time, so he hurried to the tree in 3 steps and 2 steps, and he gently flattened the branches a little, so that his sister could lie on it more comfortably. The burly black shadow rushed under the cover of the night, and it didn't exist like the NPCs in the world, waiting for you to have everything ready to attack you. Gen Kangtai put his sister away, turned around, and pressed his toes against the thick trunk. The calf suddenly exerted force, like an off-string bow and arrow, and the target was the unknown monster. Looking at the rushing Yuan Kangtai, the monster did not retreat or dodge as expected, but accelerated its speed, as if it was waiting for Yuan Kangtai to take the initiative to send it to the door. The monstrous monster let out a roar of rage, and its arms inflated like inflated balloons. The arm, which was about the same as an ordinary person, had now become 3 times the size of an ordinary person, and then before it stopped, the black chi slowly climbed up the demon's fist, continued to expand, reaching 4 times the size of an ordinary person, and then let out a mad laugh. "Cut, I'm going to see if you can cut off my arm this time." As they drew closer, the demon's fist rose high and slammed down, sending a whistling sound of heavy objects cutting through the air. It stared at Jen Kangtai's hand, and this punch was going to make the damn boy taste its pain too. Just now, it was just a mistake that this little imp cut off one of its arms, but it didn't hurt at all. Yuan Kangtai watched the heavy punch about to fall on his hand, and he didn't have to think much to know the consequences of being grazed by the fist, but he didn't panic. In the ghost's field of vision, Yuan Kangtai's slightly blue eyes were calm like water, and there were slight ripples under the continuous collision of strong air currents. Airflow, where does the airflow come from? The ghost's heart tightened, and it felt that something was out of its grasp. The sound of airflow sounded above its head, and I saw Yuan Kangtai take a deep breath, as if he wanted to evacuate this piece of air, and the smooth black knife body was flushed red, like pig iron about to be baked. Yuan King jumped high and slashed at the ghost's arm. Just like lava meets ice water, the moment the knife comes into contact with the arm, the sound of sizzling sounds, which is the result of the high temperature coming into contact with the arm, and then suddenly stops, as if hindered. When it was cut halfway, the knife could not advance again, and was blocked by the arm bone that had been strengthened by the ghost. A sinister smile suddenly appeared on the demon's face in agony. That's what it wants, ready to forcibly hold back the pain, and then screw off the head of the boy in front of it. It had already figured out that after killing him, it would eat his body in front of his sister and let the girl die in despair. "Are you smiling so happily? I'm not done yet." A great force bounced back from its arm, and he leaped high again, then fell. "If I keep slashing at once, then I'll just slash again," and the sword and bone collide with each other, making a sound like gold and stone. Once, twice, 3 times, the hard bones finally revealed a crack. The ghost grabbed Yuan Kangtai with his other hand, and the intense pain wanted it to break the delicate man in front of him into thousands of pieces, and the figure flickered. Yuan Kangtai let go of his knife, and just when the ghost was secretly happy in his heart, Yuan Kangtai jumped up and fell again, squeezing the blade with the power brought by his toes, and with a crisp bang, his arm fell and hit the ground. "Ah!" A painful wail came from the demon's mouth, and he covered his wound with his remaining left hand, but the horror was that the wound did not spew blood fountain as Yuan Kangtai expected, but slowly flowed a few drops of black blood. Didn't have time to think about it, Yuan Kangtai picked up the knife on the ground at any time and put it back in the sheath. Is this ready to give up, or is it ready to run away? No, the knife is just for a better sword. Click, with a crisp sound, just like the traditional swordsman pulled out his sword, which is extremely standard jahi, that is, the knife drawing technique. Be sure to beg for a knife to cut off the enemy's head. A clear white light streaked across the demon's neck, and bright red blood shot out, and the demon looked at Jen Souta with an expression of disbelief. "No. How could it be?" Are you? The demon's eyes widened, as if he wanted to keep the enemy in front of him in the deepest part of his heart so that he could take revenge in the next life. Yuan Kangtai showed a smile that was underwhelming. "I'm sorry, my name is Minamoto Musashi, just an unknown swordsmanship enthusiast. Remember to seek revenge on me in the next life." He rambled casually, because he also felt a slight discomfort from the continuous use of swordsmanship. As soon as he came back from running back from the mountain, he participated in a fierce fight. The main thing was not a physical battle. He had never even killed a chicken in his previous life, but this time he cut off the neck of the evil ghost mercilessly. The first time he saw the bloody scene, he felt a trace of physical discomfort. With a flick of his wrist, he swung his knife and made a blood vibrate, and the slightly black blood was thrown to the ground by him, and the blade was smooth and neat again, as if it had just been washed with water. Yuan Kangtai couldn't help but praise, "I didn't expect this knife to be so easy to use. It seems that I don't need to wash the knife next time." He looked at the immobile corpse, thought for a moment, hung the knife around his waist, carried a mossy stone, and threw it at the corpse. He didn't know if the ghost here still had the superpower of resurrection, so for the sake of caution, he still held the corpse down. In this way, even if the demon is resurrected, he will have time to react. "Hey, what is this?" Yuan Kangtai was a little puzzled, and saw that the broken demon body was constantly disappearing, and finally formed a black bead. And the beads are smooth throughout, and the lonely atmosphere covers it, making people look at it not ordinary. This is the legendary explosive equipment? Or is it a world-specific item? With doubts, Yuan Kangtai gently picked up the bead and put it away, and the demon's head disappeared with the disappearance of the body, as if it had never existed in this world. Watching the demon disappear, he had a stomach full of doubts, but as far as he was concerned, there was too little information available this time for him to complete the most basic judgment. He shook his head, trying not to think about it, and walked to the plane tree, where he took his sister down and laid her on a flat floor. He gently shook Minamoto Misa's body. Sister, sister, wake up, the monster was driven away by me, and now it's okay. As Gen Kangtai kept shaking, Gen Misa finally woke up. The eyes that were glowing with clear water opened slightly, and the first thing she saw in the blur was her brother, and she looked at his brother's face with wide eyes. 4. Kangtai. The girl stretched out her slender lotus root-like hand and gently stroked her brother's face. Where are we? Did you drive that monster away? Yuan Kangtai nodded. Yes, you don't have to worry, the monster is dead, don't be afraid, you're okay now. Hearing this, Minamoto's eyes lit up slightly, and after receiving the good news, her body burst out with new strength, and she tried to stand up and touch her brother's head. Mrs. King is really powerful, my sister will rely on you to protect her in the future. Minamoto Misa seemed to have recovered from her fear, and her brother's tall figure gave her a lot of security. And how are you? Gen Misha looked at Gen Kangtai's body, wanting to see if he was seriously injured. Are you okay, are you hurt? Yuan Kangtai looked at her sister's anxious appearance and said softly, it's okay sister, it's just a little bit out of strength, just take a rest. Then he stretched out his arm and compared it to a muscle showing posture. I go up the mountain every day to cut down trees and exercise physical strength, ordinary people can't beat me at all. It seems that he was infected by his brother's ridiculous movements, and a smile appeared on Minamoto's face. Where is the body, do you need to throw it out? Misa Minamoto's face was worried again, and even though there was still a feeling of fear in her heart, she still asked like this. Well, how do you say this? Yuan Kangtai scratched his head. At the beginning, I cut off one of the monster's arms, and then it actually regenerated. I don't believe that the monster with the head cut off can survive. Genkata pointed to the moss-covered piece and continued, that's the stone I used to hold down the monster to prevent it from resurrecting again, but the monster's corpse is gone. Then he pulled out a black bead and handed it to Minamisa. Well, this is the last thing left by that monster, sister, do you know, what is this thing? What's the use? Minamisa pinched the black beads with her slender fingers and looked at them with her eyes. Well, I haven't seen this thing either, but there's plenty of time I can guess what it's for. But Genik Misa smiled bitterly as she pointed to the wooden house that was about to fall into ruins, but I think our top priority is to fix the house first, otherwise we won't even have a place to go tonight. Then let's go back to the village first, and then I will go to the mountains to carry wood as soon as I have free time, and we will slowly repair it. Yuan Kangtai looked at the wooden house and said. This is the place where Minamoto was injured last time he stayed, and Minamoto Misa felt that living in the village might not be conducive to his recovery, so she applied to the village chief for this house that few people lived in as a place for her brother to recover. Minamisa can prepare medicine here with peace of mind and will not affect other people. He still remembers that when he was recuperating here, the village chief and the villagers came to visit him with meat, vegetables, and fruits from various animals. Yuan Kangtai said to herself, not noticing that her sister lowered her head. The village. There's no going back. Minamisa said with a slight cry. Yuan Kangtai looked at his sister with a blank face. He was not unhappy to be interrupted, so he thought of the blood that came from the stream, and seemed to know something. Sister, do you mean that it was also attacked by monsters? With tears in her eyes, she looked up at her brother and said, I'll go to the village tonight and bring the wild boar you hunted last time, and I want to ask them to exchange some vegetables for you to make soup to drink. Gen Kangtai helped her wipe the tears that were about to fall. Gen Misa took a breath and held back her emotions. When I first got there, I saw that monster tearing Nami's body, and I was so scared that I didn't dare to turn back. I just knew how to run here, and I didn't know what happened to the rest of them. She gently tugged at the corner of her brother's clothes, and Yuan Kangtai, who had been with her for so long, knew what her sister meant. He gently hugged Yuan Misa and said next to her ear, I know, sister, it's okay, you accompany me to take a look. He pushed Misa into her eyes, I'm not at ease if you take it here by yourself. Gen Misa nodded vigorously, I'll follow you. Yuan Kangtai held the knife at his waist with his left hand, and held Yuan Misha's hand with his right hand, Yuan Misa felt the warmth, settled his mind, and followed his younger brother to the direction of the village. The cold moonlight shone on the two of them, pulling out long shadows. Gen Kangta took his sister back to the place where they had lived since childhood, and he could feel the warm memories here. It was one of the few childhood moments he had. Looking at the broken scene in front of him, the ground was covered in blood, and there were stumps and broken arms everywhere. There are not many people in the village, but he remembers them all one by one: Sister Nami, who loves to laugh, the kind village chief, and Akiko Ino, who loves to cook. Even though he didn't have much affection for these people in his heart, it was an emotion called anger that began to burn in his chest. Gen Misa looked at the hellish scene in front of her, covered her mouth, tears began to drip down to the ground, and her eyes gradually became blurry. Yuan Kangtai felt that something was wrong with her sister's emotions and gently shook her hand. He whispered to her, "Sister, we still have something to do." He pointed there, "Shall we bury them and let their souls rest in peace?" Gen Misa's eyes were slightly red, and she also became stronger when she heard what her brother said. "Yes, we still have things to do." The moonlight became so bright tonight that it seemed to feel the sadness of the two children below, like a huge searchlight shining on the ground, so that they could have enough brightness to bury the deceased. A small hill was piled up in a clearing at the south end of the village, and they picked up the scattered bodies. Some of them were not found and replaced them with clothes from their houses. In front of the small hill is a wooden plaque carved one by Yuan Kangtai with a knife, on which is written the birth and death of the deceased. Wearing a white paper hat found in their house, she held a bowl of water in her hand, rinsed her mouth and bowed to the mound. Yuan Kangtai on the side also bowed as he learned from his sister. Their expressions were solemn, but Yuan Kangtai's heart was not as calm as it seemed, and he watched his sister light something like a white cloth and silk, and the orange flames devoured them. Yuan Kangtai watched the flames burn, and so did the anger in his heart. And he knows whose reason it is all about. "No misery, I'll definitely find you." Yuan Kangtai meditated in his heart. 5. Where can I find Wu Miao? Yuan Kangtai thought silently. Since he is the so-called Ghost King, then if you destroy him, you can destroy all the ghosts in this world. Then he shook his head slightly, and the unrealistic thought came out of his mind. Now with his strength, he doesn't know if he can be slashed when he encounters No Misery. The first time he encountered an ordinary ghost with poor strength, he was choked. No matter how strong the demon is tonight, he can't guarantee that he will be able to kill the other party 100%. An emotion called anxiety quietly took root in his heart, and in the face of an unknown enemy, Gen Kangtai had to become strong enough to gain a foothold in this world. He put away his thoughts, looked at his sister who was praying for the dead souls on the ground, and said, "Let's go, here we can't sleep well tonight, go and pack some things that can be used, and let's go back to the wooden house." He gently pulled Minamoto to her feet, and the two of them packed up their things and left the place silently. The faint moonlight sprinkled, and the two of them didn't speak on the road, and Yuan Kangtai didn't want to be too silent between them. "This sad emotion has always existed in my sister's heart, which is not conducive to physical and mental health." He broke the silence. "Sister, do you know what attacked us?" Minamoto said softly, "When I used to treat them in the village chief once told me about the topic of man-eating ghosts, but at that time, I only thought that he was talking about a legend, and I never thought that the evil spirits in the original story were so close to us. The village chief said that when he went to the mountain next door a few months ago to collect medicine, he met an old man who lived in the mountain, and the old man told him not to go out for the time being, because there are ghosts and creatures, and ghosts have a cruel temperament, and they feed on humans." Speaking of this, Gen Misha's voice trembled a little. She continued, "The power of the demons seems to come from the Ghost King, and the Ghost King gives them his blood, and they become powerful ghosts." Yuan Kangtai took over. "Is it like the vampires of the West?" "What vampires?" Gen Misa looked at her brother with a little confusion. "I read it in a miscellaneous book, and it said that the ancestors of vampires in the West can give humans source blood, and after getting the source blood, humans will become vampires and gain the same talent as vampires, but vampires who are not given blood in this way are far less powerful than the ancestors." Minamoto fell into thought. "That's right, that's what the village chief told me at the time. He said that ghosts are such creatures, they have the property of being immortal, and the only weakness is the fear of touching the Sunday." Saying that, they came to the house, packed up their moods and prepared to rest. They encountered too many things today, and they needed some time to calm their moods. In order to prevent another accident at night, Gen Kangta placed his sleeping bag opposite his sister and the knife on his left-hand side. After a night of silence, they each fell asleep wrapped in their sleeping bags. When the first rays of sunlight pierced the clouds and fell on Gen Sota's body, he didn't open his eyes immediately, but silently took 5 deep breaths to adjust his body to its best before he stood up. Minamoto Misa prepares breakfast for herself and her brother. Sister, you go to the mountain with me, I don't worry about you staying here by yourself. After breakfast, Yuan Kangtai was packing up the things he was going to bring with him when he went up the mountain to cut down trees, and he put axes, knives and bracers into the basket and said to the kitchen. From inside the kitchen, there was a light voice from Minamoto Misa. It's all right, the ghosts don't appear during the day, you can go up the hill with confidence, you cut the wood on the hill and flow down the river, and I set up a fence at the creek to stop the wood. If I go, no one will pull the wood to the shore. That's fine, then I'm leaving. Yuan Kangtai carried the basket on his back and straddled the knife around his waist. He is wearing a black kimono today, and the outer coat is also a black haori, and the main thing is a ruthless sun. Goodbye, sister. Have a safe journey, goodbye Kangtai. Mt. Kishi, the top of the mountain. Yuan Kangtai untied the basket and put it next to the stream, he put his hand in the water to cool down, wiped the sweat on his head, and looked at the sparkling water, it seemed that there were still fish swimming. Yuan Kangtai's mind moved, and he immediately thought of the taste of this fish stew. And if it weren't for the limited conditions, he would have wanted to make a squirrel osmanthus fish for his sister to taste. Thinking of this, he gently grasped the hilt of the knife and stared at the fish flowing in the stream like a cheetah. He held the knife in his backhand and raised it high. This familiar action reminded him of the scene in the Chinese textbook. He chuckled and shook his head, since he can't go back, let's try to live my life here. With a brush, the blade of the knife firmly stuck to a carp, and the blood gradually polluted the bottom of the water between the continuous twisting of the fish. He went to the lake, picked up the fish and threw it into the back basket, ready to change places to tie a few. Suddenly, there was the sound of sisi suoshuo from behind. Yuan Kangtai, who is particularly sensitive to sound, clenched the knife almost immediately. He turned back, facing the place where the noise was coming from. This kind of action allows him to react as soon as he sees the enemy, and as long as it is not particularly outrageous, he will definitely end up with a slight injury if he is stabbed alive. His teacher taught him to take the lead in all battles, so that he could be better positioned to deal with the enemy. There were constant footsteps in the woods, and a burly man wearing a white fox mask and carrying a human-high wooden box appeared in Yuan Kangtai's field of vision. The burly man didn't care about the boy's hostility towards him in front of him, and he bowed slightly to Yuan Kangtai. When we first met, my name was Tetsutoro Taro, and I was a knife-forging man in the knife-forging village. He raised his head and carefully looked at the delicate boy in front of him. You are a member of the new recruit of the Ghost Slayer team. Which time did you pass the test of Wisteria Mountain? Why didn't I have an impression of you? Ghost Slayer. Gen Kangtai glanced at the man who called himself Tetsukotaro and found that his muscles were exaggerated, and he really looked like an iron, forging knife. He relaxed a little, and the knife hung around his waist. I'm Yuan Kangtai, I'm not the ghost killer you say, I'm just an ordinary teenager, going up the mountain to catch some fish and barely survive on my stomach. Tetsutoro Taro looked at his expression that didn't seem to be fake, and his heart rated him up a notch. He let out a hearty laugh, ha ha ha, you are very good, if you are not mistaken, there is still a ghost residue on your knife, and the approximate time is not more than a day, have you recently killed something like a monster? 6. Listening to the man's hearty laughter, Yuan Kangtai gradually let down his guard. But it's better to keep a safe distance from the man, so that if there is a conflict, you can run away if you can't fight, and it's a big deal not to fish. The man in front of him, Tetsutoro Taro, had a body as steady as a rock, and the bruised tendons on his arms proved that his words had a certain degree of credibility. Yuan King lowered his head and looked at his body that had been practicing knives for a long time, and he was considered to be strong. But the exaggerated and intimidating comparison with the man in front of him is nothing in comparison. Tetsutoro Taro looked at the boy in front of him who didn't speak, and felt his wariness of himself, and couldn't help but take a step forward. As if sensing something, Gen Kangtai spontaneously moved a few steps to the left, his hand holding his knife again. The appreciation in Tetsutoro Taro's eyes was even stronger, and it was heartfelt, like a teenager who longed to slay a dragon and found a weapon that he could slay a dragon. He stopped, and couldn't help but clap his palms. It seems that I am right, you really killed the evil ghost alone, I seem to have seen a peerless good knife. Are you a teenager who has not joined the ghost-killing team? Tetsudoro said as if affirming, please rest assured, I have no ill will towards you, I came here to find the half-finished product that was left here. As he spoke, Tetsudoro pointed to the knife that Gen Souta was holding. This weapon of yours was the proud work of my youth, but because of the limited skills at that time, I couldn't make it perfect in my mind, so I stuck it in the center of the lake, telling myself that one day, I would rebuild it into a peerless divine weapon. Hearing this, Yuan Kangtai finally completely let down the guard in his heart. He didn't tell anyone about the knife he had picked up in this place, and the man was telling the truth. He took a few steps forward and held out his hand to Tetsudoro. Hello, my name is Gen Kangta, and last night I killed a demon in your mouth near my house. Hearing that his guess was confirmed, Tetsutaro's eyes were even more joyful, and he used his big hand to hold Gen Kangta's somewhat slender palm tightly. But the power coming from the palm of his hand couldn't help but surprise him a little. As soon as the palm of his hand was touched, Yuan Kangtai was also infected by the high-pitched emotions of the tall man in front of him. Tetsutaro sat on the ground with a big grin, and Gen Kangta on the side put a few pieces of wood, not because he was afraid of getting dirty, but because a pad could make his body look less small than Tetsutaro. Anyway, is there something wrong with Mr. Iron Tiger coming here this time? Gen Kangtai looked up at the man with a well-defined face in front of him, and seemed to be able to read the resolute and steady character just by looking at his face. Recently, there are not enough raw materials for forging knives in the village, so I rushed here after receiving the news from the village, hoping to bring some raw materials back. Tetsutaro scratched his head and continued, this mountain is a source of orangutan scarlet ore, and I was invited by my family to mine some raw ore here, and I want to bring back the sword that was unfinished last time. Yuan Kangtai looked at the knife he was carrying at his waist, and his eyes were full of reluctance. In the end, reason prevailed over desire, and he took off his knife and handed it to Tetsudaro. In that case, then you can take it with you, I hope you can show it as it really is. Tetsudaro picked up the sword, and the blade of the blade appeared as black as obsidian in the sunlight. He opened his mouth and said, do you know that this kind of knife is called the knife of color change in our place, and it is also called the wheel of the wheel knife? He motioned to Gen Souta to see the change in the color of the neon wheel knife, it will show a different color depending on the user's breath, but I have never seen a neon wheel knife that has not changed color. I wonder if Kangtae-jun can tell me the breathing method you use? Yuan Kangtai was stunned for a moment. At that, I don't know what you said, what does the breathing method mean? Immediately, Yuan Kang quickly inhaled and exhaled a few breaths of air. Is that so, Mr. Taihu, can you help me see what kind of breath I have? Tetsutaro couldn't help but feel a little embarrassed when he looked at Gen Kangta's slightly comical movements, and he said with an apologetic tone, I'm sorry, I didn't explain it clearly just now, the breath was passed down by the initial swordsman's study, and it is an ability that can fight against ghosts. He recalled with a slightly fascinated gaze. In order to be able to fight the ghosts with a human body, the initial swordsman passed down the breath, which was mainly used to strengthen the heart and lungs, so that you could increase the endurance, physical strength and strength of the body in an instant, so that you have the capital to fight against the ghosts. Hearing what Gen Souta seemed to understand, he slowly stood up and said to Tetsutaro, Mr. Tetsu Tiger, please take a look, what about it? Gen Kangtai took a breath abruptly, and the airflow in front of Tetsutaro seemed to have changed somewhat. He felt something called momentum appear in the body of the handsome young man, enveloping his body until the highest peak, and then slowly calmed down. He put away the knife and sat back again. Is that so, Mr. Taihu, am I breathing? Tetsudaro looked at him with satisfaction, as if he had foreseen a rising star. He simply spat out 4 words, intentional and invisible. An appreciative smile appeared on his face. I wonder if Kangtae-jun is willing to be my knife bearer. After speaking, he looked up at Yuan Kangtai and said, if you want, after joining the ghost-killing team, your knife will be made by me alone. Gen Kangta looked at the serious Tetsudaro in front of him, and there was some confusion in his mind. He understood what he meant, and asked tentatively. That, I don't know why Mr. Taihu chose me as an ordinary person to become a knife bearer, as far as I know, this position must be chosen carefully, if I am not the most suitable one for you, then you will not lose a lot. Tetsudaro raised his head and said in a deep voice, no. Kangtai, you underestimate your own strength, in my eyes you are like an unbladed peerless good knife, just need to go through some polishing before you can shine and become the best swordsman. Then he opened the large box behind him, and countless dazzling lights flashed from the inside of the box. Behind Tetsudoro hangs a knife box containing several forged Hinawa knives. Tetsudoro casually pulled out the top handful. The white light on the crisp blade body flows like flowing water, and the blade surface can be seen to be smooth and flat under the sun's rays, and the blade exudes a burst of coolness, reducing the surrounding temperature a little. Just glancing there, Yuan Kangtai couldn't take his eyes off. Having seen countless swords before crossing over, he knew that this sword must be the best of the best. He immediately restrained his expression and said seriously, "Mr. Taihu, I was ignorant just now, I apologize to you, I will definitely be your sword bearer, please take care of me in the future." 8. Looking at Gen Souta, who suddenly changed his attitude, Tetsudoro did not show a trace of unhappiness. This was his self-confidence as a knife forger, because he was arrogant and should have chosen his own knife bearer at this age, but he decided that first, he had not reached the peak of his skills, and second, he did not think that there were too many people worthy of being his knife bearer. And this time in this place, he was confident that he would build the knife in the most ideal way he had in mind. What made him feel even more incredible was that he happened to meet an existence in this place that was still willing to take a few more looks, even if he was as arrogant as him. So he pushed the boat and took out his most confident Japanese wheel knife at present. As he expected, the boy's eyes betrayed him. Tetsudoro handed the knife to Gen Kangta, looked at the love in his eyes and said, "From now on, you are my only knife bearer, the name of this knife is Soul Snatcher, I hope the two of us can go further and further on the road of slaying evil spirits until this evil thing is completely slain." Yuan Kangtai looked at the emotional Taihu Ichiro, and became serious. "I will live up to Mr. Taihu's trust." Tetsudoro looked at the boy who resonated with the knife as soon as he got his hands on it, and felt that he had made the right decision this time. Familiar with this soul-snatching knife, he suddenly turned his head and threw it casually, and behind him, the neon wheel knife stabbed a fish steadily, and Gen Kangta jumped into the water to pick up the fish, and made a triumphant gesture to Tetsudoro. Tetsudoro's happy face instantly froze, and he smiled wryly, "It seems not so true either." There was a burst of the smell of grilled fish from the lake. This was Yuan Kangtai's insistent invitation. In his words, it was all here, and it was not good to go back without eating something. Sitting around a pebble oven, each holding a golden crispy grilled fish. Speaking of which, how can Mr. Taihu have the habit of carrying spices with him? Yuan Kangtai chewed on the sizzling grilled fish and said with a little doubt. "Because I wandered in other places all the year round, looking for ways to improve my skills, after sleeping too much, I wanted to make my life better, and these seasonings were not heavy, so I took them with me." Hearing this, Yuan Kangtai seemed to think of something. "Mr. Taihu, do you know where you can teach people to breathe around here, similar to what academy? I need more power to slay the demons, and simple swordsmanship alone can't achieve my goal." Yuan Kangtai's expression is firm, reminiscent of the waves on the seaside, and it is also very gentle at first, but when it condenses to a point that can be wide enough to flood the entire coastline, it can also firmly carry out its will. Tetsudoro showed a thoughtful expression, which is the closest cultivator to here. "Let me think about it." "There it is." Tetsudoro instantly became excited. This place is not far from the narrow fog mountain, and there happens to be a cultivator there, who is said to be the incumbent water column. Because he felt that he was too old, he left the ghost-killing team and changed to a cultivation division, providing fresh blood for the ghost-killing team, and it is said that a new water column can be cultivated within this year or two. Tetsudoro turned around and pointed to the east position. "Mt. Sasagiri should be in that place. You wait a minute, I'll draw you a picture later, and then give you my personal identity imprint, and you just say that I recommended you to go there and learn something." He paused. "Also, the next Fuji Raid Mountain selection is about to begin, and I hope to see you in the Ghost Slayer team. Then." He patted Gen Kangta's shoulder vigorously, and had infinite expectations for him. Yuan Kangtai silently memorized the place names in Taihu mouth, and these should be the places where he set foot on his cultivation. Always here, he felt like he couldn't improve much. Some swordsmanship with his current physical strength and skills has always been unable to improve greatly. And always staying here, Yuan Kangtai doesn't feel safe. If that Ghost King, or a demon of 1 or 2 levels lower, finds here, he can't parry the other party. Tetsudoro took out a token in his backpack, which was golden red all over. A hideous giant beast is engraved with the words Ghost Slayer, and then the small characters of Iron Tiger Taro and Knife Forge are engraved on the back. He handed the token to Yuan Kangtai and said, Kangtai, this is my identity certificate, there is only one for each person, you can take it there and hand it to the cultivator over there, you can learn to breathe there with peace of mind. Yuan Kangtai took the token and held it in his arms. He asked a question, what position is the water column, is it a very powerful person in the ghost killing team? Because Yuan Kangtai remembered in his previous memories that one day his roommate was discussing the animation about ghost slaying in the dormitory, he heard a few nouns slightly, what a head pillar, Yuan Yi, and the like. In the ghost slayer team, they are generally towering pillars, and each of them is a very powerful figure in their respective genre, and they are the cornerstone of our ghost slayer team. Tetsutaro Taro said. Yuan King has no doubts, presumably the head pillar is also the top existence of the ghost killing team. It's not a good thing to ask too many questions now, and when he joins the team, he will get to know the rest of the ghost slayer team. He got up and bowed to Tetsutaro, special thanks to Mr. Tetsu Tiger for taking care of me, without further ado, I'll take my sister and get ready to leave later. Tetsutaro handed him the map he had drawn, and then pulled a dagger out of the box. Then he also handed it to Yuan Kangtai, looking at Yuan Kangtai's somewhat puzzled expression, he explained, sometimes a dagger is more convenient than a knife, and it can be a good way to prevent a ghost from sneaking up. Yuan Kangtai simply wanted to give this intimate knife-forging man a hug, and he was too thoughtful, so that Yuan Kangtai, who had to take a chicken home when he went to a relative's house, and had to get 2 corns home on the way to fish, was a little embarrassed. So he reciprocated and gave Taihu Taro a thumbs up. Mr. Taihu will become a master in the history of celebrities in the future, I hope that in the future, we can work together, go hand in hand, and create a myth that belongs to the two of us together. Hearing this, Tetsutaro Taro clearly thought of something pleasing to him, and he burst out laughing, his bold voice piercing through the forest and shaking the white birds. Kangtai, I really didn't misunderstand you, without further ado, you can set off quickly, I think you can also become a pillar-like existence in the near future. In the sound of the leaves being blown by the wind and making a noise, Gen Kangta solemnly said goodbye to Tetsutaro Taro, and agreed that he would get the ranking to join the ghost-killing team in the next tryout, and looked forward to seeing each other again in the ghost-killing team. Sister, I'm back. 9. Yuan Kangtai suddenly felt a little chilly behind him, but this feeling passed in an instant. He jerked back, as if trying to find the thing. What's wrong? Gen Misa looked at his younger brother who suddenly looked serious. Is there something behind? No, probably not, I just felt as if an eye was looking at me, I should have been dazzled. Yuan Kangtai shook his head, and after looking around, he didn't find his target, and he also felt that he seemed to be a little too cautious. After all, it's daytime, and Mr. Iron Tiger says that ghosts will die if they are exposed to the sun, and there is no exception so far. And he also gave an example, he said that some members of the Ghost Slayer team who are not good at fighting can win or escape as long as they can delay until the sun rises. Therefore, the members of the general ghost killing team have a relatively strong ability to run and turn over. Let's keep walking, I feel like we're on the wrong track. Yuan King said weakly. With a pop, a chestnut smashed on his head. Yuan Misa was a little angry with her waist, I just said that it doesn't feel right, when you were a child, you didn't lead the way once, and this time you had to rob me, why did you go wrong this time and let me twist your head off? Minamoto was even more angry when she said this. She grabbed Yuan Kangtai's ears, why, my small temple can't accommodate your big Buddha, now it's big and powerful, and the wings are hard and want to fly away. Then she snatched the map from Yuan Kangtai's hand, then you follow me, you follow wherever you go, and you are not allowed to speak. Yuan Kangtai covered the place where the chestnuts were beaten, and he looked particularly aggrieved. I feel like I'm on the right track. It must be a problem with this map. Minamisa ignored her brother, who was the same as Huibao, and stared at the map and said. Then let's move on. Let's go in this direction. With the girl's joyful cheers, she didn't seem to take the wrong path to heart, but more of a longing for the unknown journey in a relaxed mood with her brother. Seeing that his sister seemed to be pointing in the direction at will, Yuan Kangtai couldn't help but smile bitterly, but he didn't dare to say it blatantly, just muttered in a low voice. You are more casual than me. As soon as the voice was dispersed by the wind, Minamoto Misa looked at the dishonest brother and asked, what did you just say? I didn't hear clearly, you say it again. Yuan Kangtai raised her head and laughed and said, I said that my sister is the most beautiful in the world, everyone loves her, and flowers bloom. Good boy, you dare to arrange your sister and me? Stop me, watch me dig out my heart with a black tiger in one hand. Gen Misa caught up with Gen Kangta, who was frantically fleeing, and played with him. It's like this dull afternoon, but they have a dull day. Even time slows down on good days. The sky is getting darker, and the tall trees during the day look eerie at this time. Looking at Minamisa, who was constantly sweating on her forehead, Gen Kangtai couldn't help but feel distressed. He took the map. Okay, sister, it's okay, blame me for not asking Mr. Taihu about the specific road conditions, you have already led the way very well, don't feel guilty. When Gen Souta saw Minamoto Misa, she knew that she was guilty that she had led the wrong way, causing them to go from day to night. She felt very insecure in the strange night. Even if she was surrounded by a swordsman like her brother, she was still worried that she would encounter evil spirits in such a place. The sharp-eyed Minamoto Misa saw a red building not far away, a somewhat dilapidated torii. She perked up and pulled Yuan Kangtai's sleeve and shook it gently. Brother, look, why don't we rest there tonight, it's getting late, and we'll set off early tomorrow morning. Gen Misa pointed to the temple-like place and said softly. It's not that she can't endure hardship, but most of the weight is on her brother, and she is a little worried about whether her brother's physical strength can keep up. All the proposals are to take a break first, after all, I don't know when I will be able to go to the narrow foggy mountains. Yuan Kangtai wiped the sweat off his head, even his physical strength was a little tired after walking for so long, he thought for a moment, and then nodded. The two rushed to the dilapidated torii. Looking at the long dilapidated torii gate with no traces of human life, Yuan Kangtai unconsciously pouted, silently thinking, dark night, barren mountains, wild mountains, temples. This buff is simply full, it's strange that there are no ghosts in this place, right? Unknowingly, Yuan Kangtai, who had set up a flag, put down the bamboo basket on his back, and splashed dust with a bang. Looking at the dusty ground, Misa couldn't help but cover her nose, which made her, who has always loved cleanliness, feel physiologically uncomfortable. In the quiet night, the starlight flows in the long river. Yuan Kangtai saw his sister's discomfort, and he said, Sister, I'll go out to get some water to drink, it's in the stream we just passed by. Minamoto Misa's face seemed to be a little scared. Yuan Kangtai saw her hesitation and said, It's okay sister, you just shout here if there is a situation, I can rush back in a few seconds, you can help me spread out the sleeping bag or something. As he spoke, Gen Souta pulled out the new knife he had obtained from Tetsu Toritaro, the blade was clear, and the flowing breath lingered around the blade, adding some mystery under the illumination of the moonlight. Looking at the blade that was as clear as water, Minamisa felt a sense of security, and she also felt that she might not be so lucky. If you come to any place, you can meet evil spirits. Yuan Kangtai took the knife and looked around the surrounding places, but did not find anything unusual. He simply put the knife into the sheath, hung it on his waist, and then waved his hand at his sister, took a gourd and prepared to fill it with water. Beside the stream, Gen Kangtai kept pouring the clear water on his head to cool down, and the water droplets kept dripping on his jaw on the delicate face in the lake. I'll let my sister wash her face later. He took a few steps up, the water upstream was a little turbulent, with a white splash, Yuan Kangtai filled the gourd with water, he saw the fish jumping from the water, and he had an idea in his heart. He rolled up his sleeves and pulled out his knife, wanting to add a meal tonight. Although the dry food eaten along the way was full, it was still a little worse in taste. Yuan Kangtai suddenly shivered, as if he felt that something was approaching, his eyes instantly condensed, and he looked around nervously. There are enemies. I saw a humanoid creature suddenly pop out of the lake. Yuan Kangtai's pupils contracted suddenly, and it was not difficult for him, who had experienced the influence of novel culture in his previous life, to recognize that figure was a mermaid. The hideous claws rushed straight towards Yuan Kangtai's head with a whistling sound of breaking through the air. 10. The demon is well hidden, it has been lurking under the water for so long, in order to kill the delicate boy in front of him with one blow after making a move. The ghost's face is cyan with fanged scales, flanked by gills peculiar to underwater creatures. With a murderous smile on its face, it pounced straight at Gen Kangtai. Like the legendary carp leaping over the dragon gate, its claws raised high, revealing sharp flashes in the moonlight. Grabbing Yuan Kangtai's body at this height is bound to seriously injure him. But Gen Kangtai had a calm face. Why? Because this move is too slow, whether as a sneak attacker or a swordsman. In his previous life, he was accustomed to seeing countless killing moves in swordsmanship, and in his eyes, this move was full of loopholes. Long, violent breathing sounded on the shore, as if to inhale the air into the lungs in one gulp. In places where the fish people can't feel it. A realm-like thing enveloped Gen Souta, and it belonged to his unfinished, the breathing method. With a twist of his feet, the soul snatcher knife made a violent sound of breaking the air, slashing at the mermaid's claws, and the neon wheel knife collided with the scaly arm, and the mermaid's imaginary arm could compete with the knife. But he made a mistake. With a poof, and a huge piece of flesh with blood fell, and this was the price of his mistake. Ah! A cry of pain came from the merfolk's mouth. It stared viciously at the delicate young man in front of it, and said, "You damn little ghost, it's the hateful ghost-killing team again, this time I was careless. An illusory arm is growing, and it seems that the ghosts have their own healing techniques?" And in Gen Kangtai's field of vision, there seemed to be more scales surging outward than the first time, constantly getting longer, like a sharp blade. "You're going to pay for what you do." It was as if a boulder had been thrown into the river, and the surface of the lake splashed with waterfall-like water, obscuring Gen Souta's vision. He narrowed his eyes slightly, as if trying to detect where the ghost should be. With a poof, a fist-sized water mass was thrown up, exploding the moment it touched Yuan Kangtai's body. Yuan Kangtai didn't understand what this mermaid ghost was thinking for a while. What was he doing, playing games with him? The current ghost was so naive. Soon dozens of balls of water were thrown in front of him, one after another, and then exploded the moment they touched his body. Feeling that his body was a little slimy, Yuan Kangtai immediately understood the mermaid ghost's thoughts. The water balloon must have mucus in it, and it forced Yuan Kangtai to not leave here. Gen Kangtai held a knife and split the water balloon in two. Really? A snail-like stream of slime stuck to his knife, his wrist shook slightly, and a succession of water balloons exploded in front of him. At this moment, the water curtain suddenly burst and fell, and a huge black shadow jumped out towards him at this moment, and Yuan Kangtai seemed to feel something when he looked at this scene. Looking at the flow of water trails and the falling of the curtain, Gen Kangtai felt as if something had formed in his mind. The blood began to surge, the muscles on his body began to bulge, the temperature of his body rose violently, and an inexplicable force drove his body. The breath of water, the type of one, and the water slash seemed to be a move that he had memorized in mind, and Gen Kangtai swung this sword. The blade suddenly changed from black to a dazzling blue, and the soul snatcher seemed to feel the breath of its master and changed color obediently. This knife was like cutting tofu, neatly dividing the black shadow into two halves, but Yuan Kangtai didn't smell the smell of blood cut out. Not good. Fooled. At the moment when Yuan Kangtai was alert, the mermaid ghost flashed behind him and activated its exclusive power. Blood Demon Magic, Water Flow Clone. A clawed hand covered in cyan scales slammed into Gen Souta's neck. The tight scales could reflect if his owner violently tried to screw his head off. The mermaid ghost appeared beside him, a tyrannical face with a triumphant smile. Under this blood ghost technique, it doesn't know how many people it has bewitched, and it has killed a few of them in the logistics department of the ghost-killing team. The reason why this trick has been tried and tested again and again is that ordinary people simply do not have such keen insight. And even if it guesses the first time, it will crush that person before the next move. The sound of water suddenly sounded in its ears, making it wonder how there could be a sound of water flowing on the ground. Brush! It found that it saw the sky, then its own cyan body, and it didn't know what had happened until the moment it died. Behind it, a circular circle with a splash of water on all sides was slowly dissipating, and Gen Kangtai had already put the knife into its sheath. Water Breath, Type 2, Wheel. A domain of general sword techniques was unfolded by him, and he easily cut off the head of this ghost. Yuan Kangtai didn't know if this breathing method was the kind that their ghost-killing team trained. But the first time he used Gen Kangta, who had obvious supernatural powers, was a little excited, so that he had enough possibilities to perform those moves that he had only seen in books. What Miyamoto Musashi's 2 days are first class, Taijin True Sword Flow, Shinto Dream Flow. He had a chance to use these legendary sword moves. After turning over, he slowly walked to the place where the kettle had fallen and picked it up. Where did the evil ghost come from? It's really inexplicable. I haven't caught a fish yet, and suddenly it came out and blocked me from catching a fish. It's really damn good. Gen Kangtai looked at the corpse of the ghost on the ground, waiting for it to slowly dissipate, wanting to see if there were any beads falling. He raised an eyebrow. Sure enough, the corpse vanished to the ground, leaving behind a blue bead. Yuan Kangtai picked up the beads and put them in his arms. I didn't expect this one you dropped to be so beautiful, it's really blind to your ugly face. Gen Souta came to the stream again, but the current became slow, because the ghost had been killed, and the rushing water was just an act of concealment by itself. He took another breath. Breath of water, one type, water slash. The stream was stained red with blood, and Genkata picked up the fish that had been hacked in the water and disposed of it before walking in the direction of the torii. Torii. Minamoto Misa picked up a few planks outside and put them on the place where they were going to sleep, and then spread the sleeping bag on it. Just after Gen Kangta patrolled around here, Gen Misa was relieved a lot. She knelt on the sleeping bag, waiting for her brother to come back. At this time, there was a sudden sound of something rubbing against the bamboo pole at the back of the bamboo forest, like a poisonous snake swimming slowly. When Minamoto heard the voice, she felt like an electric current was crawling behind her. Inky eyes suddenly appeared at the door of the torii, with the dripping blood in their pupils. Gen Misa stared at those eyes and was speechless in fear, because she saw in those eyes a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood. 11. Gen Souta washed away the smell of blood from his body with the stream water, and grabbed a few long fish threaded with straw ropes and walked in the direction of the torii. I'll add a meal to my sister later. Yuan Kangtai thought. Toriis. Fear came through Minamoto's mind, making her feel stiff on her limbs and unable to scream. What to do, to find a way to make a sound, so that Mrs. King can hear it and hurry back. Minamoto Misa tried to move, but found that her body was still so stiff. But she was keenly aware that she couldn't move because she was afraid. It must have been something that the demon had done, otherwise Gen Misa wouldn't have been able to make even a basic sound. A pair of black eyes with blood-colored pupils kept approaching her. Are you going to die here? A terrifying thought appeared in Minamoto Misa's mind. Tears slowly dripped down the corners of her eyes, and her emotions gradually fell to the bottom. That simple cry was stuck in his throat and couldn't be made, as if he was stuck in glue. Squeak! A crisp voice rang out. The dark-eyed owner jerked back, trying to find something that made the sound. A bamboo tube used to hold water fell to the ground. This is the trap that Yuan Misa carefully used to warn before. She tied a few hairs, hung this bamboo tube on a high place. As long as someone breaks through the door, the bamboo tube will fall, so as to achieve the effect of warning. After being targeted, Minamoto Misa didn't need this device to warn for a long time, but it achieved another effect, that is. Minamoto Misa suddenly found that she could move. It's like the demon didn't stare into her eyes, so he couldn't control Minamoto Misa. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Minamisa suddenly ran towards the back door. After the demon discovers that Minamoto Misa has disappeared, a piercing killing intent bursts out of his eyes. It moved, pounced like an agile cheetah, and quickly chased after it. The first thing Minamoto did when she escaped from the back door was to shout her brother's name as hard as she could. Source. Kang. 2. Ghosts. It turns out that girls always have a talent for treble, and the transparent sound permeates the entire space. Yuan Kangtai, who was walking unhurriedly on the road, heard her sister's shout. Oops! He knew it must have been his sister who had met an evil spirit. The gloomy face suddenly climbed up to Yuan Kangtai's face, and his eyes were like a devouring monster. Are you rushing to reincarnate one by one? Yuan Kangtai didn't notice that his eyes had turned aqua blue at this time, and the water was filled with this space. Looking at the road in front of him that was still a few hundred meters, he thought of a lot of fast sword techniques in his mind. He closed his eyes. A new move was triggered by him, and he didn't know that he was slightly different from other people's water breath. Genkata rushed towards the back of the torii like a sharp arrow, and the voice was heard from there. The dense water vapor dissipated behind him with a sky blue light and shadow, and the distance of a few hundred meters was fleeting, and Yuan Kangtai had already seen his sister in a pink kimono fleeing. And after seeing him, a flash of light suddenly flashed in his eyes, and he changed direction and ran towards Yuan Kangtai's side. Behind her, an ape-like demon kept chasing after her. It took a leap and approached Minamoto with a huge bouncing force, its sharp claws as if it were about to pierce the girl in front of her. And the demon had obviously discovered Gen Kangtai, with a cruel smile on his face. Yes, it wants to kill his relatives in front of this teenager, and in this way it can get the ultimate pleasure. And in Yuan Kangtai's eyes, he saw his sister Pear Blossom rushing towards him with rain, and then there was a monkey-shaped demon that was almost clinging to his sister. What if his brain suddenly went blank? What to do? Is this all I have to do? This move is still too slow, I need faster moves, I need more speed. Gen Kangtai suddenly closed his eyes, making the demon think that this little ghost was not scared stupid, and then he heard the sound of the drum. Strange, how can there be drums here? The demon thought. Yuan Kangtai's heartbeat suddenly dropped to the lowest point that ordinary people couldn't feel, and violent breathing sounded in this space, a field enveloped this area, and a new breath was born in Yuan Kangtai's body. He opened his eyes, and everything seemed to slow down in his eyes, like an old-fashioned rewind movie. He exhaled heavily, and the muscles in his body bulged. It was impossible to imagine what had happened in such a short period of time in the eyes of the swift breath, the triple shape. And if I had to describe it, it was a meteor that pierced the space and passed through the two people who were about to come into contact. In Gen Misha's field of vision, she saw a meteor with a light tail running like her, bringing her infinite warmth, like a quilt that had been burned by a Kong fire for a long time in winter. In the eyes of the ape-shaped demon, a white comet flashed, as if it had seen the sun, and its skin had a tingling sensation, as if it had experienced the sun's rays, so that its claws that were about to touch the girl's body unconsciously retracted. This is a serious mistake. It hadn't expected to meet a terrifying character it had never seen before, and unlike all the people it had met after becoming a ghost, it felt the breath of death in the boy's body. At all this moment, it subconsciously made a recovery action, and this flaw could pull the two people who were originally not much different in strength out of a gap like a moat. At this time, the Nichiwa knife, which had turned white, slashed fiercely at its arm that wanted to grab Gen Misa, and a huge force struck, and the blade instantly broke through the arm bone that was as hard as iron, and slashed straight down the big arm towards the head of the ape demon. With a click, the knife was blocked by its other hand. The demon finally reacted and hurriedly blocked the fatal slash. Genkata breathed again to cut off the demon's head in a burst of air, and he saw that the demon's other arm suddenly turned into something as soft as a swamp, absorbing the tremendous impact from the Nichiren knife. The demon felt the tremendous force of the knife shrinking, and its face showed a fierce joy. It seems that the members of this ghost-killing team can't hold on anymore. It's good, just cut off an arm, and for a demon like it, it's harmless. After restoration, this is its field. It is going to eat and wipe the beautiful boy and the girl in front of it together today. The sheer power of the boy might have taken it a step further. The next time I meet that adult, I may be able to receive more power again. The ape ghost's real name is Ape, and he has been a bandit in this place all the year round, and his killing intent is extremely heavy, and passers-by who come and go here must be poisoned by him, and basically kill passers-by after grabbing money. And the last time it touched someone it shouldn't touch, it gained new strength. Just as the ape ghost was recalling its past, it suddenly felt a chill on its neck in reality, and couldn't help but ask. What's going on? 12? Bright red blood spurted out of the ape's neck. Yuan Kangtai seized the moment when the evil ghost was stunned. He couldn't understand what this brainless evil ghost thought. Obviously the enemy was in front of him, but he dared to be distracted and think about the past, so he loved to reminisce so much that he would send it to reminisce. It is indeed true that the evil ghost felt that the strength on the Railun knife was constantly decreasing, and that was because Yuan Kangtai let go of a hand, which made the evil ghost have the misjudgment of Yuan Kangtai's lack of strength. He reached out and reached for the gift from Mr. Iron Tiger inside the black Haori, a red dagger. And it is made of the same material as the Nichiren knife, and it is more pure because of the lack of material. Yuan Kangtai shook the dagger slightly, changed to a more suitable direction, and slashed at its neck. Li Yi's sword flow and Lao Liu's swordsmanship. From the source Kangtai's favorite knife method before the crossing, this is a knife that is insidious to the extreme, but the effect is unexpectedly good. Gen Kangtai pulled out the Hinawa knife, which could not continue to move forward, with one hand and protected it in front of him to prevent the demon from counterattacking before he died, and pressed down with the other hand, wanting to cut off the demon's head. The head of the demon was cut off so simply, and Yuan Kangtai held the knife in one hand and the dagger in the other, and kicked the demon's tall body, and immediately moved away from the headless body. The evil spirit, named Ape, did not know that he had died of his own distraction until the moment he died. With infinite regeneration, he has not had this sense of crisis for a long time, and he met a genius like Yuan Kangtai, and finally fell into the price of an empty head. There was darkness in front of him, and the last thought in the demon's mind was like a reminder of the last man he had killed. The man didn't show a trace of fear before he died, he didn't look like a prey that was about to be eaten by him. The man said to him before he died, "I am not afraid that I will be eaten by a demon like you, a hateful ghost like you, sooner or later one day will be killed by righteous humans. We will meet under the 9 springs, and I hope you will still have this strength at that time. As if it was a man's prediction, the demon was finally beheaded by the boy who slew the ghost. Looking at the evil ghost Yuan Kangtai who was slowly dissipating, he finally breathed a sigh of relief. He threw it at the neon wheel knife and gasped for breath. Minamoto Misa watched her brother kill the demons chasing her with a single sword, and trotted all the way, lest her brother be hurt. At this time, she found that Yuan Kangtai's clothes had already been soaked with blood, and the continuous bleeding of his skin spread to his whole body. Rather, it comes from the great load on his body from the first time he exerts a new breath. Because it was the first time he used it, he had no experience, so the blood vessels in his whole body cracked slightly. With that breath gone, it finally broke out. Gen Misa looked at Gen Kangtai, who was covered in blood, her eyes were full of worry, and tears flowed down in an instant. Yuan King smiled bitterly, "Sister, it's okay, don't cry, I just look miserable, in fact, it's all skin trauma, because the first time I used my breathing muscles to exert too much force, just a part of the blood vessels burst." Listening to Yuan Kangtai's explanation, Yuan Misha cried out all of a sudden, and Yuan Kangtai was even more heated. "It's not the kind of blood vessels you think, it's just a very small part of the body, it doesn't matter." She looked at Yuan Kangtai with teary eyes. "It really doesn't matter, at least you need to bandage it too, you wait, I'll go there and get some gauze for you to bandage." Yuan Kangtai looked at the sweaty and dusty man, and he also grabbed Yuan Misha's hand distressedly. "Sister, you wait for me to rest for a while, let's go together, otherwise it will be difficult to deal with another one later." He stuck the Hinawa knife in the ground, stood up with his strength, and helped each other to walk to the place where the luggage was kept. They took gauze and towels and walked in the direction of the stream, and on the way, Gen Kangtai picked up the red beads left by the ape ghost, and then handed it to Gen Misa together with the other one in his arms. "Sister, look at this thing, what is it? Why does every ghost fall after death? Can this thing be eaten?" "Eat, eat, eat, think about eating all day." Gen Misa took the beads and kept comparing them with the moonlight with her other hand, as if she had found something. She turned her head and handed it to Yuan Kangtai and said, "I can only tell you that this bead is most likely a combination of some kind of energy. But I'm not sure what that will do. Why don't I try it?" Yuan Kangtai asked tentatively. With the knowledge of the previous world, he had enough experience in novels, and he knew that this kind of dropped item was nothing more than 2 functions, to enhance physical strength, or to upgrade. Yuan Kangtai reached out to take one and try it, but Yuan Misa grabbed his hand. She pressed her finger on Yuan Kangtai's head and said, "You are a dog, you want to eat anything you encounter, what if this thing is poisonous? When we get to the narrow fog mountain, we will ask the people of the ghost-killing team." She helped Gen Kangtai to walk to the place where there was the sound of water. After some time, Gen Kangtai's black feather was covered with white bandages, which was bandaged by Gen Misa, and he picked up the fish that he threw away because he was in a hurry, and the riverside where the fire was set up kept turning. After this one thing, neither of them felt too sleepy. And after Gen Kangta told Gen Misha that he had also killed a mermaid ghost over there, Gen Misha showed a surprised expression, and she rubbed Gen Kangta's head vigorously, looking like, "I knew my brother was so powerful." Just when Yuan Kangtai described to his sister how he killed the mermaid ghost with a knife over there, "I saw a demon suddenly pop out of the water, it wanted to hit me by surprise, and wanted to bite off my head, but who is your brother and I have already seen through its tricks, and then drew a knife to cut off the water, using my newly realized breath of water, and cut off the head of the mermaid with one knife." Yuan Kangtai picked up the kettle and took a sip. "Just when the head of that ghost was about to be cut off by me, it had tears and snot flowing together, begging me to let it go, but I thought that it didn't know how many people it had harmed in the water, so I cut it in two mercilessly, and it lost its breath." Yuan Misha's eyes seemed to have a little star, because she knew in her heart that she was just a drag, and she didn't help her brother these few times. She also knew that her brother said this with a fluttering eyebrow just to reduce the guilt in her heart, and she just listened to her brother say there with a smile. She picked up the grilled fish and handed it to Gen Kangta, motioning for him to eat 2 bites to replenish his strength. When Gen Kangtai took the grilled fish and was about to feast on it, he noticed that there seemed to be a figure standing in the moonlight. On the vast trunk of the tree stood a petite body. Under the moonlight, the girl's cherry blossom-colored Haori moved with the wind, wearing a white fox mask on her face and carrying a sword hilt on her body, and she was obviously a swordsman like Gen Souta. Yuan Kangtai saw the girl's dress clearly through the moonlight, and after adding that he really didn't feel the killing intent in her, he let go of the handle of the knife and shouted at the girl. "Hey, is that the one from the Ghost Slayer squad? Do you want to come down and eat some grilled fish together?" 13. Yuan Kangtai's crisp voice spread far away, and when she heard the invitation from the people below, the girl with the fox mask tapped her toes and landed like a fluttering butterfly. In order not to misunderstand them, the butterfly-like girl landed about 2 meters away from Jen Kangtai and them, and her boneless hands took off the mask on her face. A pair of azure eyes were exposed, and the girl's hair was not long, but it was particularly suitable for her petite and cute face. The girl's voice was gentle and pleasant. "When we first met, my name was Zhenhu, and I was a swordsman who was about to become a ghost slayer. Who are you looking for here? I'm familiar with this area, so please take care of me." Zhenhu bent down and bowed to Yuan Kangtai and the two. Yuan Kangtai and the two couldn't help but stand up in the face of such a polite girl, and Yuan Kangtai also bowed to her. "Hello Miss Mako, my name is Jen Kangta, and this is my sister Jen Misa." Yuan Kangtai pointed to her slim sister and said, "We are here mainly. Well, I'm lost, but we're actually going to the narrow foggy mountains to learn from a teacher." "Oh, is that so?" Mako covered his mouth, looking a little surprised. "I thought Mr. Jen you were from the Ghost Slayer team. Isn't your divine wheel knife only worn by the Ghost Slayer team? But I've never seen this one. I don't know which knife forger's work it is." At first, she just thought that these two people were from the ghost killing team to carry out a mission, and she went out tonight to rescue the humans in the vicinity, because there are ghosts here all year round, and she didn't dare to come out at will. It is said that there are two more powerful evil spirits here, one is the overlord of the water and the other is the mountain. She didn't know that these two ghosts had died at the hands of Jen Kangtai. She looked at the boy named Jen Souta, even though he was wrapped in bandages, but the momentum of the rain and the sky made her a little curious about this person. Yuan Kangtai scratched his head and answered Zhen's question. "Well, this is a bit of a long story." Jen Kangtai started from the first time he picked up the knife, and said that after he killed the evil ghost for the first time, he met the knife forger on the Red Stone Mountain, and then how he got the knife. It was the knife forger who recommended them to the narrow fog mountain, and told the real god about the fight with the two evil ghosts just now. Zhenhu listened carefully at first, and the more she got to the end, the more surprised she became, and when she heard that Yuan Kangtai had killed the two evil ghosts by herself, her small mouth couldn't close together. She looked at Yuan Kangtai's eyes with a hint of admiration that even she didn't notice. "Kangtai is really so powerful. Did he kill two evil ghosts by himself? Is it really too strong? And I heard it right, Kangtai hasn't joined the ghost killing team yet. Is it already so strong without practicing the breathing method?" There seemed to be little stars in Mako's eyes. Yuan Kang, who praised these words, blushed too much. He waved his hand and said, "It's nothing, it's just that the luck is better. Those two evil ghosts are not strong. Miss Zhenhu, you often live here, do you know where the narrow foggy mountain is?" Zhenhu covered his mouth and said with a smile, "I have been living in the narrow foggy mountain since I was picked up by the master. If you don't mind, just follow me. Now there are only 4 people in the mountain, and it will become more lively for Kangtai and your sister to live in the mountain." Yuan Misa looked at his brother's idiotic expression, and rarely pressed his forehead. It seems that his younger brother was captured by someone else's girl. She smiled at Zhenhu, who was kneeling next to her, and said, "Then trouble Miss Zhenhu, the two of us are really not suitable to find a way." Jen Misa handed the grilled fish that was still hot on the grill to Mako. "This is my brother's grill, do you want to try it? My brother's skills in grilling fish are still very good." "Thank you, Sister Misa." Mako took the grilled fish and ate it in small bites. When he took the first bite, Zhenhu's eyes lit up. It seems that this time there is finally a person in the mountains who cooks deliciously. Senior brother Rabbit can't cook, and senior brother Yiyong is even more so. Hey, it's really not easy. She gave a thumbs up to Jen Kangtai as she ate. Zhenhu took out a white silk sill to wipe her mouth. She tilted her head and chuckled at Yuan Kangtai. "I didn't expect Kangtai to even cook so well. It's very late today. If the master can't see me for a while, it's time for the senior brother and them to come out to find me. You guys come with me to the narrow foggy mountain tonight. There will be other evil spirits here. It is not safe for us to stay here. You follow me and set off together. There is a special battlefield in the mountains of the Sasagiri Mountains." A tall old man was sparring with a boy in white feather weaving with a bamboo knife, and the bamboo knives in their hands kept colliding, and the bamboo knives made a dull sound at the moment of contact. The old man's movements are generally very few, and the bamboo knife in his hand is very steady, just defending against the young man's bamboo knife and not making it easy, and the pace under his feet is constantly moving, so as to easily catch the boy's seemingly fierce knife technique. The dojo was very quiet, and there were not many people watching this practice, but a black-haired boy sat outside the arena, staring intently at the figures on the field. The boy who couldn't attack for a long time on the field finally couldn't help but use his moves, and a touch of water was on the field. Breath of water, one type, water slash. There was a faint blue light on the bamboo knife, and a trace of water filled this space, and the old man broke the attack of the yellow-haired boy with a single blow, and a horizontal knife was pumped on the boy's stomach, and a huge force struck, and the boy was whipped as if he was about to vomit. He gritted his teeth and was about to use the second form, when the old man waved his hand to signal that this was the end of the day. The boy's body was like a sauna, and the intense water vapor continued to evaporate. He let go of the handle of the knife and gasped violently. He also knew that his state was not good, and if he forcibly used the second form again according to his state, the end would be a direct loss of strength. The black-haired boy outside the field seemed a little calm. He picked up the kettle and ran to the field to help his senior brother, Bunny, drink saliva. The rabbit picked up the kettle and drank it in small sips, but the old man standing on the stage did not stop his behavior. He spoke, his voice was gentle but majestic. "Yiyang, you help your senior brother to the side to rest, it's time for you." Fu Gang Yiyang, who was named by name, seemed a little excited, and he picked up the bamboo knife on the ground after helping his senior brother to the sidelines. Clasped his hands and then faced his master. "Master Scale, Tomioka is brave enough to ask for advice." At this moment, a voice like a wind chime sounded, "Master Scale, Senior Brother Rabbit, Senior Brother Yiyang, I'm back, I brought 2 newcomers outside to join us." 14. They. Old man on the field and the young man named Yoji Tomioka unhurriedly let go of the wooden knife in their hands and looked back. They heard that it was the voice of the real mushroom. The rabbit on the side stood up and waved at Genhu and his party. "Senior sister, where did you bring back the 2 of you?" asked the rabbit, looking at the boy and girl in front of him. "Senior brother, don't worry, I'll introduce you." She pointed to the 2 behind her. "These 2 are new students introduced by Mr. Tetsutaro, a knife forger, and this young man came to learn from your master. This is his sister Minamoto Misa, and his younger brother is called Gen Kangta." The 2 of them smiled and bowed together. "Please take care of me in the future." Zhenhu pointed at the field with his round and delicate fingers. "That's our master Scale, that's my senior brother Tomioka Yiyang." Fingers turned down. "This is also my senior brother, called Rabbit." They. Old man and boy on the field nodded, and the rabbit on the field waved at them. Mako led the 2 to the stage, and Yuan Kangtai observed the old man in front of him. The old man's tall body did not look so burly but slender and straight. The wrinkles on his face are faint, with a majesty that no time can wash away. He looked at Gen Soda and carefully looked at this young man who was called by Tetsu Tiger Taro for 100 years, with high talent and deep prospects, who was expected to become the best ghost swordsman. The letter to him was full of admiration, saying that it was a fine piece of jade, and that he hoped that Mr. Scale Long would polish it carefully. The boy slumped his shoulders slightly. This was to make the knife faster, but his hands didn't show too many calluses. No wonder it was a talented player. The old man admired in his heart, but his face was not obvious, and he couldn't help but smile when he looked at the boy's restrained momentum. He stretched out his hand towards Yuan Kangtai. "The first time we met, my name was Scales Zojinji, I was the water column of the previous generation, and now I am doing some cultivation work for the Ghost Slayer team." Yuan Kangtai also stretched out his hand, and at the moment of contact, he couldn't help but sigh in his heart, what a powerful force. Looking at the old man's unattractive body, it seemed to look like a dead tree, but there was an infinite vitality inside. "Hello Mr. Scale, I hope to join the Ghost Slayer in the next trial, please teach me how to do it." Yuan Kangtai bent down respectfully. Etiquette is the most important thing on their side, especially in the face of teachers. In the first meeting, it is very likely that you will be kicked out of the gym because you don't know how to be polite and don't understand the rules, which is a very common thing. Seeing that the young man in front of him who seemed to be a little younger than Yiyang was so polite, a smile also appeared on the corner of his mouth recently, and he helped Yuan Kangtai up, and then saw the Railun knife on his waist. He couldn't help but show a hint of surprise that Tetsu Toritaro didn't say in the letter that he had chosen the boy as the knife bearer. As a nose with a special function and a particularly keen eye, he obviously sensed that the knife carried the breath of death of more than one demon, and it was obvious that the boy had killed the demon by himself without any guidance. I've already received a letter from Mr. Iron Tiger and know what you think, but I still advise you to give up this selection, because there is not much time left this time, and I am afraid that you will not be able to pass by then. You wait for the next chance. I can guarantee that you will definitely pass the selection next time, and this time I want you to watch my disciples, how they train, how they pass the test. They. Old man said to Yuan Kangtai. He is a cultivator whose purpose is to train excellent talents for the Ghost Slayer team, not to send them to death. The trials of Fuji Raid Mountain were not like the children they imagined. They had to survive the encirclement of several evil spirits, and one of them was close to the level of the lower string. If it weren't for the disciples of this generation who were good enough, he wouldn't worry about letting them participate in this selection. The purpose of the selection is to cultivate ghost swordsmen who can truly fight evil spirits, rather than newcomers who have not participated in even the most basic life and death battles. He didn't know when he would come up, and he looked at the teenager in front of him who wanted to participate in the next audition, obviously a little surprised by his arrogant tone. However, he still said a good word for this boy who might become their junior brother, Master Scales. He probably doesn't know when the next selection will start. He turned to face Yuan Kangtai and said to him, the next selection will start in half a month. We have been cultivating here for 3 years, do you understand the gap? Yuan Kangtai looked at the golden pupils of the young man in front of him, who was older than him, and said, I know that half a month is a bit different from 3 years, but we have a different starting point, and I think this time is enough. Listening to the arrogant words of the young man in front of him, Tomioka Yoshi also stood up, and he was about to say something, but Mako, who was listening to their discussion, opened her mouth, and she said softly, Kangtai killed a ghost alone in their village. Tomioka Yoshiyuki and Kyoto's eyes twitched, obviously a little shocked to hear the news. Seeing their reactions, Makoto smiled triumphantly, and she continued, then Aota killed 2 ghosts alone in one night on the way to the narrow foggy mountains, 1 mermaid ghost and 1 ape ghost. I saw that the pupils of the 2 of them dilated instantly, and they looked at each other and found the shock in each other's eyes. Even the best record of the 2 who had mastered the breath of water after 3 years of cultivation was only the 2 of them working together to kill one. Seeing that the 2 senior brothers knew what she wanted to express, she stood quietly aside, looking at the young man in the center of her speech. Her tall body did not feel a little proud because of her praise. Yuan Kangtai stood aside and listened quietly. He didn't say anything, because he felt that these were what he should do, and he could do better. And Scale, who had already guessed all this, just smiled faintly and looked at them, and he could also predict what would happen next. Sure enough, the rabbit seemed to see something in Tomioka's eyes, and he said to Yuan Kangtai, why don't we have a competition here now? Let Master Lianglong see your general strength, and arrange cultivation matters for you. Yuan King naturally agreed, and he said a little tactfully, I saw that you have already tried to compete with Mr. Scale, why don't you take a rest now? 15. It's obviously a kind reminder in Yuan Kangtai's heart, but in the sound of the rabbit, it's like despising him. He picked up the bamboo knife and handed it to Yuan Kangtai, took another one in Tomioka Yoshi's hand, and looked at the slightly tired figure of the rabbit. Tomioka Yoshi said, why don't I come? It just so happens that the competition between me and the master has not started yet. The rabbit shook his head, anyway, it's also me who is a senior brother to come first, you wait for the next one. The rabbit raised the bamboo knife obliquely. Yuan Kangtai raised his eyebrows, and decided to take over the showdown, although in his opinion, there was no suspense in this competition. Liang Longzuo looked at the tense atmosphere on the field and clapped his palms lightly. Then let's get out of here first. Hearing the master speak, Yi Yang no longer argued with his senior brother, and Zhenhu took Yuan Misa to find a comfortable position to sit up and watch the competition on the stage. Yoshi Tomioka was standing in the audience, although he didn't believe that anyone could easily kill a ghost without any training, but after hearing about Gen Soda's record, he thought that he needed to play next. Come on MRS. Kang. Mrs. King remembers the mercy of her subordinates. Listening to the 2 people who kept cheering for Yuan Kangtai off the field, Rabbit couldn't help but laugh angrily. He glanced at the senior sister who seemed to be arching the fire, and that glance seemed to say, are you serious? Seeing that the senior brother seemed to have sent a dangerous message, Zhenhu changed his words, come on, senior brother, hold on for a while. He couldn't help but laugh as he watched them happily look at each other, and he quickly stepped back, his arms raised high like white blades across the sky. Let's go! Hearing the master's order, the rabbit stared at the young man in front of him who was under great pressure, and the bamboo knife in his hand kept changing positions. Rabbit carefully looked for the flaws of the young man in front of him. No matter what the weakness of the young man was, he could only have one chance, because with his current physical strength, he could only use one breath, so he must seize this opportunity. Looking at the rabbit in front of him, who was constantly changing his body shape, he seemed to be looking for a chance to kill with one blow. Yuan Kangtai didn't make much movement, and his physical exertion tonight was also relatively serious, so he also decided to use only one move to solve the boy named Rabbit. The sound of rapid breathing, one-shaped, and broken thorn, resounded in this space, and in the perspective of the left and near of the scales, an inexplicable field enveloped Yuan Kangtai, and a strong airflow appeared behind him, like a white meteor. Everyone in the audience stared at this scene intently, and Tomioka Yoshiashi's face was even more undisguised surprise. He actually knows the breathing method. Then he was a little puzzled. What kind of breathing method is this? Why haven't I heard the teacher talk about it? The bamboo knife, which had been yellowed from many blows, was inserted under the armpit of the rabbit at this time, as if to tell him that if the opposite side was his enemy, then he was already dead at this time, and the bamboo knife that easily passed through his armpit must also pass through his heart. There was no unwillingness, but the rabbit looked a little confused. He looked at Yuan Kangtai, pulled out a bamboo knife and threw it on the ground. Willingly, he said, I lost, and I know why you have the confidence to pass the trial in such a short time. I hope to give me a lot of advice in the coming days. There is no arrogance from above, and the rabbit sincerely wants to improve his strength through practice in the next few days. Liang Longzuo, who was standing on the side, spoke recently, and with his eyesight, it was naturally not difficult to see that Yuan Kangtai had mastered his breathing. Although there was a slight gap with theirs, he could see that the breath used by Jen Kangtai this time had a bit of a feeling of wind breathing, but he was not sure, because so many users of the wind breath he had seen were not as fast as Yuan Kangtai. He had a bold guess in his mind. Yuan Kangtai, I don't know what the name of your self-created breath is. Yuan Kangtai, who was seen through at a glance, was not particularly surprised. He was just surprised by the old man's keen insight. He turned to face the old man and said seriously, Teacher Scale, this trick was realized by me in the torii at the foot of the mountain. I named it the Breath of Speed. Its lethality is not particularly large, but as you can see, its speed is unparalleled. The old man he called Teacher Scales didn't refute either, because in his opinion, this sword alone was enough to become his disciple. What Tetsutoro Taro said was true. He really found a teenager with potential to match the pillar. He finally understood where the confidence of the boy that he said that he would definitely pass the next selection came from. It comes from self-confidence in his own strength, confident that after improving his ability to the extreme, he can overcome them one by one, no matter what difficulties lie ahead. Yuan Kangtai bowed to the rabbit and said, agreed. Then, he threw the bamboo knife at Tomioka Yoshi in the back. Now it was his turn. Tomioka Yoshi didn't think that Jen Kangtai was humiliating him. He gently lifted the bamboo knife and said a word of invitation to Yuan Kangtai. Seeing that his younger brother was actually going to pick two people on the field, Jen Misa's eyes lit up, and Mako, who was sitting next to her, also whispered something like asking both sides to cheer. Teacher Liang Long looked at Yuan Kangtai's bandaged body and asked, Are you okay? Do you want to take a day off? While the knife in my hand is still hot, I take this opportunity to familiarize myself with the knife technique. Then Yuan Kangtai looked at the young man with blue eyes in front of him and saw his desire for victory. Yuan Kangtai, please advise. Yoshitoshi Tomioka, please advise. The battle is on the verge of breaking out. The rabbit walked to the bottom of the field and dragged his somewhat tired body towards the real mushroom and sat down not far from them. After greeting Zhen, he asked Yuan Misa curiously, Yuan girl, I heard Zhenhu say that you are sisters and brothers. Why is your brother so strong? Yuan Misa covered his mouth and chuckled. He loved these very much when he was a child, and his talent was also very high, and when he was 12 years old, he came back from hunting a wild boar in the mountains, and since then I have known that my brother is particularly talented in fighting. I see. The rabbit nodded lightly, and then joked to Zhenhu, Senior sister, why did you turn to outsiders when you went out? Could it be that you are a little interesting to that kid? A touch of red flew out of Zhenhu's face, and she casually pinched a ball of grass and threw it at the rabbit, and her explanation was as light as this ball of grass. I'm just curious about his strength. where it looks like you think. Zhenhu turned his head and gestured slightly. The other person's sister is still here, glared at the rabbit and seemed to say that you are talking too much, be careful that I hit you. The rabbit made a zipper gesture to close his mouth, and turned his head to watch the showdown. 16. The two on the field began to confront each other, and after watching a battle between Gen Kangta and Pseudo, Tomioka knew that he couldn't let Gen Kangtai make the first move, and the sound of breathing sounded in this space. Unlike Gen Souta, Tomioka's breathing was short and powerful, and he opened his aqua blue eyes. The breath of water, Ichino style, and water slash were different from the small-scale damage that Gen Souta performed for the first time, and in Tomioka Yoshida's sword technique, almost the entire battlefield was enveloped. He wanted to make Yuan Kangtai retreat, so he had no choice but to take this knife. Zhenhu, who was watching from the sidelines, explained to Gen Misa, senior brother Yiyang is the most talented of the three of us, and his water breath can already be proficient in using the sixth form, but his physical strength can't keep up for the time being. Minamisa nodded slightly and continued to focus on the field. A huge blue curtain of light enveloped the entire battle arena. And in the face of a menacing knife, Yuan Kangtai made his choice. I saw that Yuan Kangtai's chest was slightly bulging, and the corners of his mouth were filled with white airflow. He held the knife in his backhand and aimed the tip of the knife at the ground. In Gen Soda's field of vision, time suddenly slowed down, and the airflow slowed down in front of him. He watched Tomioka Yoshida's sword light shoot only a centimeter away from him, and when he was about to touch him, he bent down to dodge the knife, and then rushed towards Tomioka Yoshi on his toes, slashing the wooden knife diagonally. Tomioka's eyes twisted, as if observing Gen Soda's movements, and he held his knife across his waist to block the blow with precision. A smile appeared at the corner of Yuan Kangtai's mouth. This knife is not over yet. A tremendous force came from the tip of the knife. Flirtatious. The bamboo knife continued to cut Tomioka Yoshida's clothes irresistibly, and the huge force from the knife almost made him unable to even hold the knife, but Tomioka Yoshi responded, and his blue eyes brightened. A circular slash of the water breath, type 2, and water wheel appeared. Tomioka steadied the bamboo knife that was about to be taken off, and then landed where Gen Souta was standing before, gasping for breath. Using the breathing method twice in a row made him a little overwhelmed. After all, the target was not a real enemy. Gen Kangtai also saw that Tomioka was about to reach his limit, and he didn't want to continue to drag it out. The sound of a blower-like blast enveloped the field, and new breaths rang out again. Yoshi Tomioka on the other side showed a bitter smile. It's really a monster. He felt that he and Yuan Kangtai opposite him were not at the same level at all. He had been training here for 3 years, and a newcomer who had never been systematically trained actually wanted to defeat him in a crushing attitude. No. It's not time to give up. His heart was rekindled, and he gripped the hilt of the knife with both hands, and he must block it in the face of the knife that was about to be unsheathed. Wu. As Gen Kangtai exhaled the air from his mouth, a familiar realm enveloped him. The breath of speed, the 3 shapes. And the fingers were like a meteor crossing the sky in an instant, and before everyone could see anything clearly, Gen Souta had already appeared behind Tomioka Yoshio, and stood with his sword drawn. It seems that nothing has happened, but the bamboo knife in Tomioka's hand is broken into 3. Tomioka's pupils dilated, and he couldn't believe what had just happened. In his field of vision, he only saw a white light passing through, and after a touch of warmth, the bamboo knife in his hand was broken. Gen Kangta turned around and shook hands with Tomioka, who was a little dazed. He smiled and said, "Don't be discouraged, I feel that you are quite strong, there are not many people who can block my sword, your talent should be very good, keep up the good work." Tomioka Yoshiyong listened to Yuan Kangtai's praise, and his heart warmed up slightly. And watching Yuan Kangtai's performance of shaking hands with him, after all, he had a good impression of him. After watching the teenagers on the field shake hands and make peace, there was a sudden applause on the side, and the rest of the people were cheering for their wonderful competition. Scales walked slowly to the stage and then showed a hearty smile. He was in a really good mood today. He said to the 2 people on the stage, "The performance is very good, and so are you, and you have dealt with 2 consecutive strokes of water breathing." Liang Longzuo recently turned his head to look at Yuan Kangtai and said, "I wonder if Kangtai can tell me which trick of your quick breath is this, so as to satisfy the curiosity of this old man of mine." Yuan Kangtai showed a harmless smile and scratched his head. "It is the 3rd form of the breath of speed, because at the critical moment when encountering evil ghosts, the breath of water is not suitable for short distance sprints, so I created this trick by myself, named Finger Moment. Its characteristic is that it is very fast. You still breathe water? Teacher. Liang Long showed a touch of surprise again. This boy had already given him a lot of surprises today, and he didn't expect that there would be an unexpected gain. Rabbit and Tomioka looked at each other with a wry smile. What a monster! They thought to themselves, and then in an instant they turned the blow into a burning heart of effort. For them, the more powerful Yuan Kangtai is, the more they can learn from him, and they can rest assured that they can hand over their backs to him when fighting to the death of evil ghosts. Well, it's just a little bit, my first style is not as powerful as senior brother Yi Yang. Yuan Kangtai explained. Teacher Liang Long shook his head. Blindly pursuing a wide killing area is not feasible at your current stage, and your strength is not enough to support a large area of effective killing at the beginning, so it is enough to wrap the range of the first type only around a distance in front of you. He said to everyone, Yi Yang, you and the rabbit Genhu have to listen, you have to pay more attention in the next few days. I have set a task for a few of you in the back mountain. If you can't complete the task before the next selection begins, you should not participate in this trial. His voice grew stern. If you can't even complete the test I set, there's no need to go there and die in vain. Yuan Kangtai raised his hand weakly. Teacher, what about me? Scales Longzuo glanced at Yuan Kangtai recently. You have reached the standard, you can train with them first, even if you don't pass, you can protect yourself in the selection with your breath. In 2 days, I will set up a new set of cultivation methods for you, although your sword skills are fierce, but in my opinion, there are many flaws, and you can't get out of 3 rounds under my hands now. Teacher. Scala Long's majestic voice sounded. That's all for the time being tonight, it's not early, you remember to rest early, and you have to get up and train tomorrow. Nothing was said all night. 17. Gen Kangta, who was assigned to a small room, didn't complain, and it was good to have a place to live. He is not a picky person in this regard. His sister is said to live with Mako. It was just dawning, and the morning fog covered the narrow misty mountains. Yuan Kangtai, who had rested, jumped up from the bed. He stretched his body wantonly, and his strong recovery ability made all the injuries he suffered yesterday heal. He tore off the bandage on his body, revealing his smooth skin, and put on the blue feather weave with the flowing cloud pattern that he had issued yesterday, and he was full of vitality again. He turned off the candle flame used for lighting and gathered towards the back mountain with the Hinakara knife. Master Scales and Rabbit were already waiting for him in the middle of the field. Yuan King smiled embarrassedly and stood obediently next to Genhu. Each of the 5 children in front of him was full of fighting spirit, and Liang Longzuo also showed a gentle smile recently, but he was wearing a red Tengu mask today, and there was no way for others to notice this smile. Master Scales cleared his throat. Genhu gently pulled Yuan Kangtai's sleeve and handed him a piece of osmanthus candy. Yuan Kangtai took the candy, opened it, threw it in his mouth, smiled gently at Mako, and then gave her a thumbs up. Master Liang Glong's gentle voice sounded. Today is still the same, in the morning after dodging all kinds of traps, go down the mountain, practice the basic movements of wielding knives, bayonets, and splitting knives in the afternoon, and try to cut the boulders I prepared for you in the back mountain at night. Understood. A uniform voice rang out between them. What about me? Asked Minamisa weakly as she stretched out her hand. Liang Longzuo said to her recently, Maisha, you are not suitable for fighting. I heard from your brother that your medical skills are very good, and I will let you join the butterfly house when the time comes. Then he thought for a moment, for the next few days, you can just prepare food for them. The rising sun pierced the mist and shone through the trees, and the white birds flew into the sky with their calls. Yuan Kangtai and his party continued to warm up for training, and the rabbit suggested that it would be better for the 4 of them to have a competition to see who was the first to arrive at the bottom of the mountain for breakfast. As soon as he talked about betting, Yuan Kangtai immediately became interested, and he asked if there were any lottery heads. When Yuan Kangtai heard this, he began to rub his hands. And Genhu on the side was not happy when she heard this. She glared at the rabbit angrily. Senior brother, how can you play like this? Mrs. King just came, how can you be so familiar with the terrain? This is not fair. Yuan Kangtai played a round game. He laughed and said, it's okay, if I lose at that time, I'll make you grilled fish to eat. My grilled fish is a must. Hearing this, the eyes of all 3 of them lit up. Everything is good in the narrow foggy mountain, but the food is not particularly good, and the master prepares them with rich nutrients, but if you want to talk about the taste, cough cough, it is still a little worse. In this way, it is not easy for Zhenhu to say anything. She turned to Yuan Kangtai and said, Kangtai, there are a lot of traps on the mountain, please be careful. Zhen Kangtai nodded, and the trial began. The four of them were constantly dodging all kinds of traps and obstacles on the mountain, and they had to rush down the mountain at an extremely fast speed. The four go hand in hand and then gradually separate. Before leaving, Zhenhu greeted him in a light voice, Kangtai, see you at the mountain. Then, he flicked his toes and floated down the mountain like a butterfly. A thick black line suddenly rose among the dead leaves, and Yuan Kangtai simply jumped up and left the trap behind him, and continued to run for a distance, and a chill appeared on Yuan Kangtai's left. Yuan Kangtai casually picked up a branch and swung it down vigorously, and the trap full of daggers was knocked down by him in the air, and he continued to run down the mountain without looking. Easily bypassed the trap full of knives, and then threw a branch into the dead leaves, and a trap made of rope was spotted. Zhen Kangta let out a hearty laugh, and this time he will definitely win the first place. A dull voice sounded, and Zhen Kangtai used the breathing method, and he was confident that he could dodge all the traps as fast as he could. As the realm expanded, a huge log suddenly fell next to him, and Yuan Kangtai kicked the log off with one kick and hurried down the mountain. When the three of them arrived at the bottom of the mountain one after another, the rabbit smiled when he looked at the figure of Yuan Kangtai who was not on the road. Haha, it seems that the genius boy is not omnipotent. He had already thought about waiting for Yuan Kangtai to come down. He gently patted Yuan Kangtai on the shoulder, and told him as a senior brother that you are not good yet, you have to practice more. The rabbit let out a weird laugh, and Zhenhu watched the rabbit gently bump him with his elbow, and reminded him, senior brother, remember to pay attention to your image, you didn't make a single move under him yesterday. Can you not mention this? Rabbit looked at Zhenhu with resentment. They all say that girls are extroverted, but your elbow is also turning too fast. There was a blush on her face, and she hit her elbow again. What nonsense. Tomioka Giyu on the side just looked at them quietly, but what made him a little puzzled was whether it had been too long, why Yuan Kangtai hadn't come down yet. It couldn't have been an accident. Shouts broke the silence. Hey, senior brother Rabbit, senior brother Yiyang, Miss Zhenhu, what are you doing standing there? Hurry up and come down and eat noodles. Zhen Kangta shouted loudly towards the mountain with a bowl of ramen. His mouth was stuffed with ramen, and he said vaguely, come down quickly, the noodles won't taste good after a while. There was an instant black line on the rabbit's head, and the real mushroom on the side showed a smile. Okay, I'll be there soon. Then Mako turned his head to look at the rabbit. Senior brother, it seems that you are not the first, right? Tomioka Yoshiyuki also smiled faintly and followed them to the bottom of the mountain. The four of them sat on the table holding ramen, and they all gave a thumbs up to Minamoto Misa. And Yuan Kangtai looked at the rabbit with interest, and the rabbit also gave him a thumbs up, and the other two too, and said in unison, Kangtai, you are so good. Yuan Misa on the side was also amused by a few of them. She listened to Yuan Kangtai explain to them, saying that she was indeed going down the mountain for the first time and was not familiar with the road, but he knew that the straight line between the 2 points was the closest. He chose the nearest path and rushed down. The rabbit on the side is full of black lines, and he also knows that the straight line is the fastest, but it is also the most trapped. He asked Yuan Kangtai, what about the trap? Yuan Kangtai looked downcast, just dodge. Only the petrified rabbit and the two snickering were left. Yuan Kangtai shouted for another bowl. At dusk, the four of them continued to practice swinging knives in the back mountain, and Yuan Kangtai, who had already welded these basic movements to his body, was asked by teacher Liang Long to instruct the other three after doing it a few times. The shoulders are slightly relaxed, and the left foot is 5 centimeters closer to the right. Yuan Kangtai gently corrected Mako's movements, and Makoto immediately adjusted his stance when he heard it. Place your palms up a little and raise your head a little. He walked up to the rabbit and looked at the sweaty rabbit and said. Finally, he came to Tomioka's side, and after discovering that his movements were impeccable, he also stood with them and practiced swordsmanship. The sun shattered the shadows behind them as if it had shattered the foam. 18. The night covers the entire back mountain, and the sun disappears and the moon rises. The four of Yuan Kangtai were standing in the open space of the back mountain at this time, surrounded by rock caves one by one, and there were more than a dozen round boulders in the open space, each of which stopped in its own pit. A slightly curious voice sounded, "Master Scales, is our training goal tonight to cut down these stones?" Yuan Kangtai pressed the rock with 5 fingers, the rock as hard as iron even though it was slightly soaked in the mist at night, but it still looked indestructible. Yuan Kangtai took out the sun wheel knife and gently knocked the stone with the back of the knife, making a crisp sound of gold and stone colliding. "No, your goal is to split these stones in 2. Yuan Kangtai kept gesturing with a knife. He felt that he might not be a threat to this stone under normal conditions, and he could only cut a little after using the breath of water, and he felt that he might scrape this stone after using the breath of water. Master Scales pointed to the countless boulders here and said, "I didn't say that you should pick the biggest one, there are so many here, even if you pass by cutting one at will, I think you have the qualifications to participate in the Vine Attack Mountain." Then he looked at Yuan Kangtai with a playful expression, "If you can't do it, I will also allow you to participate in the selection, but remember to run faster when the time comes, don't be caught by the evil ghost and cry." Hearing this, Yuan Kangtai's face turned red, obviously thinking that the other party looked down on him. He shouted, "Impossible, Master Liang Long, you are underestimating me, I will choose this, if I don't cut it before the selection competition starts, I will be practicing here for a year and waiting for the next selection." Liang Longzuo showed a smile recently, and he said to the others, "You all heard what I said to Yuan Kangtai just now, and you are the same, after cutting the stone, you can participate in the selection." Then his expression became solemn, "If you can't, you should give up this idea as soon as possible, I have lost a lot of students, and I don't want you to follow their fate." They 3 of them all looked serious, only Yuan Kangtai was a little confused. Looking at Yuan Kangtai's puzzled expression, Master Liang Long said in an emotionless voice, "You are not my first batch of disciples, I have accepted a total of 15 apprentices, and your 11 senior brothers and sisters did not pass that selection and died in Teng Attack Mountain. So." Master Scallop suddenly raised his voice, "Don't think it's child's play, I've stressed this to you many times just to tell you that when people die, there's nothing left. You must practice seriously here, otherwise you will be sent to death if you go to the battlefield." After saying this, Master Scales left the place. At this time, the mood of the rabbit also became depressed. He glanced at the somewhat frightened Zhenhu and the calm Yiyang, and said, "Train, cheer up, learn more from the new junior brother, this time a few of us will definitely be able to pass the assessment and become a qualified member of the ghost-killing team." He pulled out his forging knife from his waist, found a stone and began to practice. Everyone dispersed, and Yuan Kangtai also knew the gold content of the so-called selection at this time, and those who survived like raising Gu were the real elites. He reined in his mind and faced the rock, which was 2 heads taller than him, and a sense of unyielding defeat surged up in his heart. Yuan Kangtai took the initiative to change his knife to the same material as the others, and the ordinary knife they held was slightly lighter than the Japanese wheel knife used by Yuan Kangtai, which made Yuan Kangtai a little unaccustomed to using it at the beginning. Facing the boulder, he began to look for possible opportunities. Yuan Kangtai slashed towards the rock with a scream of knives in both hands, and the moment it came into contact with the rock, there was a sound of metal impact, with a slight resonance. Then Yuan Kangtai found that his knife was wrong, and the blade of the knife slashed across the surface, just cutting off a few pieces of minced pieces. He frowned, wondering what was wrong. His knife was aimed at the middle of the rock, but the strength couldn't cut into the middle of the stone. Zhen Kangtai began to try another method, and the sound of violent breathing sounded in this space, so loud that the 3 people who practiced in the same space couldn't help but cast their eyes here. The breath of water, the shape of one, and the surface of the water slashed. And the blade collided with the rock under the rapid slash, and after the blow, only a 1 centimeter deep cut appeared on the rock, which couldn't help but make Yuan Kangtai a little frustrated, but he wanted to try again. So a larger realm expanded, enveloping Yuan Kangtai and the rock, and the breath opened again. Water breath 2, the water wheel. Yuan Kang's face turned around and slashed hard at the stone again, this time leaving a deeper trace, about 3 centimeters or so. Following this trend, he will be able to cut the stone apart with the help of a watermill a few months later, but this is obviously not realistic. But there were still 108,000 miles to cut through this boulder, and after using 2 breaths in a row, even his physical strength felt a little difficult after using it twice. Another time passed. Yuan Kangtai's face was covered with sweat, and the beads of sweat the size of beans fell to the ground and gathered into a small water tank. Yuan Kangtai gasped violently, and the rocks were covered with large and small cracks, of different depths, but none of them could reach the level that satisfied him. The moon hung high in the night sky, and was suddenly obscured by the blowing clouds, revealing a corner slightly, as if reminding Yuan King that it was time to rest. Rabbit and Tomioka had already completed their training, but they were embarrassed to see that Gen Kangtai did not move back, and at this time they realized that there was a role like a king in their own team. Mako stood aside and gently handed the kettle to Yuan Kangtai. "Let's take a drink and rest, Mrs. Kang, it's late." Yuan Kangtai took the kettle and took a sip, wiped his mouth and hung the kettle on his body. He looked at the slightly tired Zhenhu and the other two who were also practicing hard, and said apologetically, "Rabbit, Yiyang, Zhenhu is sorry, I'm sorry to cause you trouble tonight." The rabbit jumped off the rock. "Whatever you say, it's all for the sake of common progress." Then he walked down the hill with his hands behind his back, and he yawned. "I'm here tonight, I'll go back first, I'll see you tomorrow." Tomioka silently followed behind him, waving at the two of them. Yuan Kangtai watched Janaya wave goodbye to them, and Ling Long's body looked particularly beautiful in the moonlight. Yuan Kangtai also felt an inexplicable atmosphere appear under their night sky, and Zhenhu turned his head to meet Yuan Kangtai's eyes, and Yuan Kangtai's eyes were as clear and gentle as a lake of water. The night fell on his face, so that Zhenhu couldn't see the blush on his face clearly, and he pretended to be calm and said, "It's getting late, let's go back. Your is bright, thrush for her." 19. 2 weeks have passed in a flash, and during this time, because of Yuan Kangtai, the other three are training desperately, and the pressure brought to them by Yuan Kangtai is too great. Strong strength, high understanding, and trademark can roll so much, who can stand it? The rabbit was tortured by him and was about to go crazy. Tomioka Yoshiyang on the side comforted him. At this time the two pairs have been formed between them, and now everything needs to be tried, Zhenhu and Yuan Kangtai together, and Tomioka Yoshi together. However, no matter how hard he tried, Yuan Kangtai still couldn't cut the rock in two, as there were more and more cracks in the rock, but that last step was always missing. Would it be the case today? The rain and fog of the back mountain shrouded the entire back mountain, and at this time, a delicate young man held a knife that looked scarred, facing the rock that had no ball shape after many days of slashing under him. The blade is not as strong because it is not infused with special ores. A faint white filament of air emerged from the corner of Yuan Kangtai's mouth. Yuan Kangtai stared at this rock as if he was staring at the enemy. After so many days of training, Yuan Kangtai had already figured out everything about this rock. But he still couldn't split it. The rain was pouring down, making the ground muddy, and the dripping on Gen Kangtai's face showed a touch of perseverance. Boom! Branch-shaped lightning filled the sky, like an evil ghost stretching out its minions. Yuan Kangtai looked up and watched this scene silently. The raindrops were getting bigger and bigger, constantly hitting his face, and in his eyes, it was almost impossible to open his eyes. Boom! A cloud of purple lightning exploded in the sky again without warning, as if it was the anger thrown by the gods to the world, and the huge bombardment sound made Yuan Kangtai can't help but cover his ears, but he stared at the sky deadly. It seems to be about to see something. Zhenhu, who was standing in the pavilion on the side, looked at the rain that was getting heavier and heavier, and couldn't help but go to give him an umbrella, but the old man on the side stretched out his hand to stop her. Master Liang Long didn't turn around and reprimand Zhenhu. He said lightly, "Don't bother him, he is comprehending something." The rain is getting heavier and heavier, and the torrential rain has swept the whole area, but it doesn't seem to be affected by Gen Kangta. He entered a state of epiphany, and a new breath seemed to be born in his mind, like mushrooms after a rain, but it was still a little bit of a flash of inspiration. After so many days of hard training in chopping rocks, it didn't give him the idea of water milling. He wanted to open up a new path in another way, and he knew that the main thing that couldn't split the stone was that the lethality of the two breaths was not very high. Yuan Kangtai asked Master Xiang Long last night, "Is there a breathing method with great killing power that can achieve the purpose I want? I can learn it." And the master just told him that there should be, but he wouldn't. And it doesn't take a lot of effort to split a stone. The most important thing is to use some skills, including understanding the state of the knife, the internal structure of the rock, the right angle of the knife, and the extremely fast knife speed, to cut the stone. Hearing this, Yuan Kangtai did not refute, but just took a knife and walked silently towards the back mountain. He wanted to create a lethal breathing method to deal with his current slightly thin damage. Boom! There was a loud bang, and the sky exploded with thunder again. instantly turning a tree in the distance into ashes. A huge ball of light was reflected in his pupils. It's like a drink before an epiphany, and the dozens of steps in the peach blossom fountain are suddenly opened, and a new breath is born. Yuan King was so moving, people couldn't understand his movements, and there seemed to be providence between his gestures, like a witch Zhu dancing a dance to the sky with the staff in his hand. A purple electric current suddenly climbed up Yuan Kangtai's arm, and then covered his body down, and as the purple became thicker and thicker, Yuan Kangtai's eyes lit up, as bright as a gas lamp. He stared at his opponent, the biggest rock. He leaped high like a lion, drew his knife and slashed at the rock with 1,000 bolts of purple lightning. A breath that was very different from the other thunder breath of this world appeared. Thunder Breath Remnant 1 No-Shape Thunderstorm. When the tip of the knife came into contact with the rock, the thunder fell towards the people as if it had been guided, and Mako covered his face in fear, revealing his kitten-like eyes and continued to watch this amazing scene. Master Scales and Rabbit narrowed their eyes in unison, staring at the thunderbolt that looked like a lightning dragon falling down. There was a loud boom, and the boulder and the tip of the knife shattered into small pieces, like another meteorite had fallen, and the 1.5 height rock shattered into powder, and most of the top rocks were shattered into powder. Liang Longzuo suddenly covered Zhenhu's ears, and his mouth opened slightly to balance the huge noise, and so did the rabbit Yiyang on the side, and at this time, the eyes of the two of them were undoubtedly full of yearning. Yuan Kangtai turned to look at the old man and raised the knife high. With a little pride on his face, he did it, just like what he said in front of Master Scales at the beginning, and he once again proved his strength. At this time, the old man was not stopping Zhenhu. She hurriedly ran to Yuan Kangtai's side and raised an umbrella for him. Makoto handed the pink silk he was carrying to Yuan Kangtai and asked him to wipe the water droplets on his face, and Mako's cute little face looked up at Yuan Kangtai with infinite admiration in his eyes. Then gently wiped the dirt off his feather weave. Kangtai. It's really amazing. Mako's voice rang out in admiration. Yuan Kangtai didn't speak, just smiled slightly, and then put the silk on Mako's head and slowly wiped her hair that was wet because she ran too fast. Janayu's face turned red in an instant, like a red glow in the morning. The rabbit on the side was constantly coaxing, "Hey," someone blushed. Even Yi Yang, who has always been unsmiling, has a faint smile on his face. It's just that Master Scales showed a meaningful smile on his face, as if he had learned something interesting. Because he thought of an old friend of his. Their family has used the thunder breath as an inheritance for generations, but they are a kind of yellow lightning, and I don't know what kind of face they should have when they encounter Zhen Kangtai's completely different breath. I guess it's going to be exciting. Master Liang Long looked at the two people on the boulder training ground, and sighed in his heart, it's good to be young. Yuan Kangtai and Zhenhu trotted all the way here, they put away the umbrellas for sheltering from the rain, and stood still. Yuan Kangtai embarrassedly handed the broken blue chopping knife to Master Liang Long. He scratched his head and said embarrassedly, "I'm sorry, Master Scales, I didn't mean to break the knife. It should be my fault. If you take the Railun knife tonight, will it be easier to cut off the stones?" At this time, there was no rainstorm outside the sky, but it didn't seem so important. 20. Yuan Kangtai shook his head. "I said that I would all use the same weapon. If I used the Railun knife that Mr. Taihu gave me, wouldn't it be too unfair to the three of them?" Master Scales looked at the pouring rain outside the pavilion and asked, "Is your breath called the breath of thunder?" "It should be, Master, I don't know very well, or you should give it a name." Zhen King stomped the dirt on his feet. "As far as I know, your thunder breath is unlike anything I've ever seen." "Oh." Listening to what Master Scales said, the other three people sitting around the pavilion also cast their eyes, obviously interested in these things. The former Narazuka Himajiguro of the Ghost Slayer team is the same identity as me, and they are both cultivators of the Ghost Slayer team, but he is responsible for cultivating the users of the Thunder Breath. As the predecessor of the Naruto, he and the Ghost Swordsman he cultivated are both users of the Thunder Breath. Master Scales paused. "But most of their Thunder Breath shows yellow thunder and lightning, and yours has never had a purple one." Others also looked at Gen Soda curiously, and he explained, "Maybe it's because of the difference in the use of people? To be honest, I didn't know that there were other thunder breaths before this, and the creation of such a breath was just a whim and a coincidence. I felt the tyrannical power of the lightning, the power of destruction, and my greatest dilemma at that time was that I needed this power to help me cut through the rocks, so a new breath was born." Yuan Kangtai pointed to the huge crater and smiled bitterly, but I didn't expect that this blow actually pulled real lightning, and the power that seemed to be able to destroy everything made me feel terrified, and this is why it has reached such a terrifying destructive power." Master Scales nodded. "That's true, the trick that was accidentally obtained actually has such a terrifying destructive power. I don't know if you can still use this knife again. I feel that if this knife is hit, even the ghost of the upper wind will be greatly damaged." Yuan Kangtai shook his head. "This knife is a manifestation of the right time and place, and under normal circumstances, you can master the ordinary thunder breath by practicing a few more times, but to achieve such a knife, you also need this special weather as an aid." Then, he pointed to the rainy sky. "On a field like this, if I'm lucky, I can do it again." Master Scales nodded and agreed with Yuan Kangtai's statement, and then Yuan Kangtai said two more words, almost making his jaw drop. "I've also realized the other two moves, but the burden of those two moves is particularly large, and I don't think I can use them with my current strength." And, Yuan Kangtai paused, "I should be able to improve the breathing method for the real ones now." In Master Liang Glong's slightly shocked eyes, Yuan Kangtai continued, "Master, your water breath is indeed very good, but I think that among the three of them, except for senior brother Yiyang, who can go to the end of this road, Zhenhu and Rabbit may not. I don't think it's particularly suitable for this breathing method, and I can improve their breathing method in the next few days to give them more strength." Listening to Yuan Kangtai point out their current situation, the three of them also showed shocked expressions, especially Tuntu. He has been feeling this way recently. It may be that his innate affinity for water is relatively low, and the speed at which he learns the breath of water is indeed not as fast as his junior brother. Unexpectedly, their little junior brother could see it at a glance. The same is true for Zhenhu. Because she is a little short, she is not outstanding in addition to her own strength, and her water breath is also progressing more slowly, not even as good as the rabbit, and the only suitable Yiyang also feels that what Yuan Kangtai said is true. Because according to his progress, when he is selected, he can even break through to the 10th form. Yuan Kangtai looked at the expressions of the three of them, and he knew it even more. "I don't think they have found the right breathing method, so their progress is relatively slow, and I asked the master to allow me to modify their breathing so that they can use the breathing method that suits them more freely." Master Scales nodded, looking at Yuan Kangtai's eyes full of relief. "I'm relieved that you can think about them like this. You can teach boldly, and if you don't understand something, we'll discuss it together." Zhenhu couldn't help but let out a cheer, and the eyes of the rabbit also burst out with joy. If senior brother Kangtai can really be like what he said, then they should be sure of 9 out of 10 in this selection. "My Ayama." Jen Kang drank the ginger soup that Minamoto had boiled for them, and the bright yellow ginger soup had a hint of spiciness, and at the same time had the fragrance of Sydney. Yuan Kangtai couldn't help but drink a few more bowls, and even the real mushroom, who had the smallest appetite, blushed and said that he wanted another bowl. Minamoto also made several large bowls of miso ramen with sliced wild boar meat on top and a few green leaves that were brought up by Minamoto. Looking at the few people on the table who were gobbling up, Minamisa showed a gentle smile. Watching the food she cooked being eaten by them, Minamisa also felt that she was also needed by others. At this time, Master Scales reminded him, "Misha, before the selection begins, I will first send you to Fuji Attack Mountain, and then tell the owner of this generation of Butterfly House to let you join there to study. Your medical skills are very good, I hope you can shine in another place." "Okay." Genmisa nodded vigorously. Yuan Kangtai couldn't help but ask, "Master Lai Long, won't my sister go up the mountain with us?" Master Scales shook his head. "She belongs to the logistics staff, and she doesn't need to fight and kill with you. Everyone's tasks in the ghost killing team are different, and the logistics and medical staff are as important as you ghost killers." "Well, then I see." Genkata put the big bowl of ramen on the table. "I'm going to rest first, and we'll meet in the back mountain tomorrow. I'm going to think about how I can transform your breathing method tonight. Mrs. Kang, I'll see you tomorrow." Mako waved his hand at Yuan Kangtai. Yuan Misha on the side brought a bowl of soup to Master Liang Long. "My brother is such a stubborn character, and he has caused you trouble during this time." Master Scales took a sip of the soup and shook his head and said, "No, Yuan Kangtai is the most talented child I have ever seen. It is my honor to teach him. Such a genius cannot be buried in this place. My role is to let him go to more places to save more human beings. He is responsible to his fellow disciples. He will be a qualified Ghost Slayer team, and in time there will be one more towering pillar in the team of the Ghost Slayer team." Listening to the old man's praise of his brother, Minamoto Misa thought of the figure that rushed towards him desperately after she met the ghost at the beginning, and her heart was full of warmth. Yes, my brother is such a person. It's pouring rain outside the door, but it's warm like spring inside. 21. In order to fill the gap in the stone he had split, Gen Kangtai went to the mine next to the narrow fog mountain to bring back a suitable rock. Although he didn't find such a big one, he was going to pay it back with several small cobblestones, and by the way, he could also exercise his strength. In the middle of the night, a huge rock moved on the mountain, so that the people who saw it thought that they had seen a ghost, but they didn't know that under the stone was a beautiful young man walking on his back. Yuan Kangtai's head was constantly dripping with sweat, but his breathing was still steady. This was the 11th he had memorized in the past few days, and the senior brothers and disciples in the back mountain were also extremely diligent under the stimulation of Yuan Kangtai. The more Yuan Kangtai carries, the more they cut, the fewer stones there are, and the fewer stones Yuan Kangtai carries. So the more stones you have on your back, the fewer stones you have. Hey, hey! Gen Kangtai walked towards the mountain with the stone on his back, but he didn't know that there was an evil ghost following him behind him. Minoru Toto, who was originally a bandit in the mountains, became an evil spirit, and gradually became fond of hunting woodcutters who went up the mountain to cut trees, or little girls who dug wild vegetables. He was very cautious, because he felt that there was an unusual aura on that mountain, an instinct that had been tempered after countless life and death battles, and that mountain had ghost swordsmen who could slay him at will. Even after becoming a ghost, Minoru Tomoto is still cautious, because in this way, he can survive well in the vicinity of the ghost swordsman's life. These days, he has been eyeing this young man who has been coming out to carry stones, and he wanted to do it at the beginning, but he looked a little afraid of the knife on the young man's waist. And seeing the young man carrying such a heavy stone up and down every day, he has been holding back for fear of being pretended to be a pig and a tiger. But today he couldn't help it, fresh flesh and blood were in front of him, since the mermaid ghost and ape ghost he knew were killed by unknown ghost swordsmen. He hadn't eaten meat for a long time. As if God had mercy on him, the terrifying knife that the boy had been carrying at his waist was somehow replaced with a bamboo knife, and his desire for fresh flesh gradually overcame his caution. He has been following Yuan Kangtai, and the reason why he has not been discovered is because of his blood ghost technique. As the name suggests, this blood ghost technique can greatly reduce the level of perception of humans as an individual. He had been following Yuan Kangtai for half an hour, but the boy still looked like a teenager going to the mountains to hunt pigweed, stupidly happy, and did not perceive the danger behind him at all. Suddenly there was a slip under Gen Sota's feet, and the rope that was pulling the stone behind him suddenly broke. Smack! There was a crisp sound, and the rock fell to the ground and rolled down the mountain rapidly, the weight of a hydraulic press crushing the demon named Minoru Tomoto, crushing him into a mural. Shin zip file, zip package. Minoru Tomoto didn't expect this scene, and his keen escape ability saved his life at the best moment, and he stretched his neck more than 10 centimeters before the boulder hit his head, just avoiding the boulder's crush. Ah, oh no, how the rope is loose, so that the master can't see it and scold me to death. The young man's crisp voice rang out, chasing the boulder down the mountain. Here's your chance. Minoru Tomoto thought about it. When Gen Sota ran to him, he would definitely bite this hateful boy to death in one bite. The neck bounced like a spring. Minoru Tomoto opened his bloody mouth at Gen Kangta, and the fangs in his mouth flashed a chill in the night. A small sound sounded, like the moment the key opened the door lock. Yuan Kangtai suddenly felt a touch of danger, so he instinctively used the bamboo knife to wave, and the demon's head was split in two from the middle. Damn, what the hell, scare me. He didn't think about how he died until he died. Obviously the young man's hand was just a wooden knife. Yuan Kangtai looked at the sudden burst out of a head and jumped instantly, and under the emergency response, the bamboo knife on his waist instantly unsheathed and slashed, all in one go. In Gen Kangtai's slightly confused eyes, he saw that the demon's body was wiped out, and a black bead was left on the ground. He picked it up and kicked it in his pocket and continued to chase after the falling stones, without even looking at the place again. Damn, it's really good luck, you can kill a ghost when you come out and carry a stone, this evil ghost is too intimate. When Yuan Kangtai came back with the stone on his back again, it was already late at night, but there was still the sound of gold and stone colliding one after another from the back mountain, which was obviously the sound of the senior brothers training hard. At this time, there are still 3 days before the start of the audition. During this time, Yuan Kangtai improved her water breath for Genhu, so that her breathing was mainly closer to the agility aspect, and Yuan Kangtai handed over his speed breathing skills to Zhenhu. Then show her the fusion of water breath and speed breath, and how to play after the fusion, and give her the third form of his speed breath. Yuan Kangtai also thoughtfully cut down the killing skills of the third type. What is left behind is fast-moving, bordering on flickering. As for the transformation of the rabbit breathing method, Yuan Kangtai combined his character and gave two plans. One is the combination of water breathing and speed breathing, which are mainly life-saving like real mushrooms. The other is the second move that Yuan Kangtai realized last time, that the breath of thunder was not shown in front of people, and the combination of the breath of water. In the rabbit made it clear that he liked the kind of move that opened and closed and had a particularly destructive power, so a fusion move was born. Fusion breath, thunder water ball, and surge electricity doma in when rabbit used this move, a circle of purple balls suddenly appeared around him, and the water and lightning formed a domain-like existence. He slammed into the rock, and a violent roar rang out, and even though the wind and dust were blowing on the rabbit's face, it was difficult to hide his excitement, because a large hole had been blown out of the back of the rock in front of him. What shocked the old man was not only Zhen Kangta's ability to breathe on his own. He has also met many such geniuses. Changing other people's breathing methods is even more genius among geniuses. After the original swordsman created the breathing method and passed it down, the swordsmen who changed the basic breathing method to the 5 basic schools of water, thunder, flame, rock, and wind were all amazing. And Yuan Kangtai in his eyes can not only stand side by side with those people, but even surpass them. This trick has already taken shape in the field. Even though he had studied deeply in the breath of water, he had learned a lot from it. 22. And unlike the two of them, Yi Yang rarely rejected Yuan Kangtai, not because he had any opinions about Yuan Kangtai, but because the breath of water was originally very suitable for him, and forcibly modifying the breathing method would easily outweigh his gains. Tomioka Giyu's water breath has made a qualitative breakthrough under the hard practice of these days and the tremendous pressure brought to him by Zhen Kangtai, and he can now use the first 10 forms taught to him by teacher Liang Long more proficiently. He thought that even if he didn't participate in Zhen Sota's breathing transformation plan, he would be able to pass the teacher's training with the original water breath. Today is the last day of the assessment, and it is also the day before the selection starts, and tomorrow the 4 of them will go to participate in the selection of Fuji Raid Mountain. Teacher Scales put on a Tengu mask, the red mask isolated his slightly gentle face, and the temperament of the whole person changed, which means that he will inevitably be ruthless in his assessment today. Are you 4 ready? Master. Scales looked around, and the 4 people who were about to be assessed stood straight. Ready. The sound of a uniform voice represents their self-confidence. So who to start with? Master Scales said. The rabbit stood up, he put on a yellow-green feather weave with pine needles today, and his expression was different from the previous grin. I was the first to come to the narrow foggy mountain, since you all call me a senior brother, then start with me first. Zhang. A sharp voice rang out, and the rabbit drew his knife and faced the human tall rock in front of him. Yes, he wasn't going to challenge ordinary rocks, but rocks that were about to approach the largest in size, and he thought he could do it. Yuan Kangtai and the 3 of them, who were standing beside him, took a few steps back, so as not to block the power of the rabbit. The rabbit closed his eyes and suddenly inhaled a breath of air, and the airflow around him also changed direction at this time. His body began to heat up, and the green tendons of the hand holding the handle of the knife burst out. A water blue glow began to surround him, and then he took another big breath, and the purple light filaments climbed up his body, gradually merging with the aqua blue light. A purple-blue ball of light appeared beside him, and the huge force caused the airflow next to him to change direction and rush towards his domain. There was a faint purple in the grey eyes of the rabbit at this time, and his eyes suddenly condensed, and he raised the knife that was enveloping the domain high and swung it down, and the voice seemed to be cut off at this moment. Boom! There was a loud bang, and the smooth cobblestone cracked in the middle, no. More like an explosion, and under the huge impact, all parts of the rock were devastated. He wiped the sweat on his head that had not been revealed, and looked at Master Scales with expectant eyes. Well done, Master. Liang Long did not hesitate to praise his students, especially the children he picked up, who were like successors in his heart. Rabbit, pass the assessment. The rabbit put away his knife and raised his fist in a joyful cheer. The 3 of Yuan Kangtai on the side gave him a round of applause. Next, Masa. Master Scales' voice sounded again. Yuan Kangtai gave her a cheering look, signaling that she would definitely be able to. Rabbit returned to his original position, and Mako picked up the knife and stood on the field. She exhaled slightly to calm her nervousness. She whispered to herself in her heart, "Come on, you can definitely do it. Don't live up to the expectations of the master and Kangtai." Holding the knife in both hands, facing the rocks that were smaller than the rabbits, she knew that she was not the type with great power, and she did not demand so much from herself. Short, rapid breathing sounded, and power erupted from Mako's petite body. The breath of water, fusion, and flowing water triple slash jumped high on the tip of its foot, and the blade collided with the rock 3 times. When she fell, the rock split in 2 and fell to the ground and splashed dust. Wow, Zhenhu is so powerful, she has made great progress in the past few days. Yuan. Kangtai clapped his palms too hard, cheering for Zhenhu's passage, because among the several of them, only Zhenhu was the most difficult in this level. Her strength was too small, and she was not suitable for such a high-intensity split. But despite her efforts, she still completed the task. Master Scales also nodded approvingly to her. Tomioka Giyu came on the field. He looked extraordinarily calm, and his black hair moved with the wind. The breath of water, the wanton type. And the tide of strikes slashed at the rock many times in succession with a thick stream of water, and the rock broke off in response, and all this happened quickly, and Tomioka passed the test with a flash of light. Master Scales applauded him. Before Gen Sota, Tomioka Yoshida was the most gifted swordsman he had ever seen, and his talent for comprehending the breath of water was unmatched. Tomioka Giyu put away his knife and bowed slightly to Master Yuan Long, and retreated to the back to look at Yuan Kangtai. At this time, they all looked at this boy, because of his arrival, a lot of changes had taken place in the narrow fog mountain, and what they didn't know was that the gears of fate had been misaligned because of Gen Kangtai's arrival. Avoiding their tragedy in another timeline also makes the current Tomioka seem less reticent. Yuan Kangtai smiled slightly and walked up with a knife. He picked a rock that was bigger than the last time, and this one was excavated and polished by Master Liang Long, and it took the strength of the 2 of them to move the stone here, which shows the weight of this stone. But in Yuan Kangtai's opinion, his final trial should be like this, and if it is too easy, he will not have too much pressure. This time, Gen Kangtai wanted to test where his limits were. He was in a state of full concentration. The whistling wind sounded in this space, and Yuan Kangtai seemed to inhale all the air into his lungs, only to see that his chest was bulging high, but his heart was as dull and powerful as a drum. White filaments of qi, blue streams of water, and purple lightning all converged on his body. Yuan Kang's deep voice sounded, "Stand back, I'm going to make a big move." Seeing that everyone retreated, Yuan Kangtai completely released his own knife. At this time, there was not even a single cloud in the endless sky, but at this time, the people who were watching the knife in the rear heard the sound of thunder. Boom! A muffled thunder exploded in this space, making it impossible to tell whether it was from the sky or from Gen Kangtai. The huge rock was split in an instant, and a few pieces of broken stone even exploded towards everyone, but they were all intercepted by Yuan Kangtai one by one, and he still had the strength to take down the rocks at this time. As if a detonator had been blown through the inside, the huge rock was shattered into pieces by the knife, as if a bomb had been thrown. Thunder breath, mixed domain, heavenly punishment god thunder. At this moment, it suddenly dawned in the mind of the Scales Longzuo, and the opportunity to resolve the confrontation between humans and ghosts that had been opposed for thousands of years seemed to be on the handsome young man in front of him. 23. The last time he stood in front of the mountain and waved goodbye to them. He still wears a red Tengu mask, because he doesn't want the children to see the tears on his face under the mask. As a breeder, he sent away 12 children in succession to be selected. But none of them joined the Ghost Slayer team, and the old man knew that they all died in Fuji Attack Mountain. He was already old, and there was no way to avenge them, but this time, Scales saw hope in Yuan Kangtai's body for the first time. He silently prayed to them in his heart, hoping that this selection would go well. Wow! On the mountainside of the Vine Attack Mountain, Yuan Kangtai and the others couldn't help but let out an exclamation, and in their field of vision, the entire halfway up the mountain was covered with wisteria flowers, like a purple ocean. They slowed down and walked up the stairs to the pavilion and saw a large number of people gathered in the pavilion. Zhenhu explained to a few people in a low voice, "At this time of the year, it is the selection competition of the ghost killing team, and here is the assessment of becoming a ghost swordsman, and the butterfly house, that is, the medical team where your sister is now staying, and other jobs such as the logistics team have another selection method. The wisteria flowers on the mountain bloom all year round, and the ordinary demons are disgusted with this breath, and there is no way to stay on the mountainside, so the ghost-killing team uses this place as a selection venue. You're amazing, it's a moving encyclopedia, where did you hear all this knowledge? Yuan Kangtai praised her. A blush appeared on Zhenhu's face, and she whispered, these are all what Master Scales told me. Tomioka gently tugged at the corner of Zhen Kangtai's clothes and motioned for him to look in the middle. Under the wisteria tree stood two identical little girls, wearing wisteria flower decorations on their heads and purple kimonos, making it easy to see at a glance that they were the owners of the place. The two girls spoke at the same time, and childish voices were heard in the area. Thank you all for coming to tonight's final selection for the Demon Slayer team. When all the people looked at the place, they continued, this Vine Attack Mountain is imprisoned by the ghosts who have been captured by the ghost-killing team, and the ghosts cannot leave here, because the wisteria flowers that disgust the ghosts are grown halfway up the mountain to the bottom of the mountain. But there are no wisteria flowers up here, and you need to stay on the mountain for 7 days, and those who survive can pass this trial. They. Two girls bowed to them, good luck to you. Then an irritating voice rang out, hey, those two kids, where is my neon knife? How can I kill ghosts without a good knife? It was a young man with black hair and blue eyes, his eyebrows were thick, and he wore a green Megatama pendant around his neck. His expression seemed impatient, do you want me to die for you without giving me a knife? The black-haired girl said with a blank face, this gentleman is sorry, only ghost swordsmen who have passed the trial can get the opportunity to choose oars, and now they will not provide knives. They. Young man's forehead jumped up, and with a hint of anger he pointed to Yuan Kangtai, who was watching the play on the side, why does that little ghost have a Nichiren knife, and you say that you don't provide it? Yuan Kangtai, who was quietly eating melons on the side, looked confused, he didn't know why he ate melons and ate himself. The white-haired girl spoke, the gentleman's knife is not provided by us, if you are interested, you can ask the gentleman yourself. It's not too early, so please climb the mountain early. They. Black-haired man who listened to this explanation snorted disdainfully, and then strode in the direction of Yuan Kangtai and the others. Hey, little ghost, I'll lend you a knife and return it to you when I get down the mountain. As soon as the young man stretched out his hand, he was about to pull out the knife on Yuan Kangtai's waist, but Yuan Kangtai not only did not stop him, but looked interested. There was a crisp sound of the bell, and a red mark appeared on the young man's hand, and the rabbit smashed the unsung scabbard into the young man. The young man retracted his hand in pain, his face began to turn red. And he stared at the rabbit who took out the knife viciously, do you want to die, little ghost? The rabbit put away the knife with an indifferent expression, did your parents tell you to ask other people's names first when you meet, don't always scream as little ghosts, who do you look down on? The young man became particularly angry at this time, the green tendons on his arms burst out, and he reached out and pressed the handle of the knife, as if he was about to burst out and kill people in the next moment. Seeing this scene, Mako's whole body tensed, and she felt that if there was a conflict in a while, she would definitely be faster than this young man. Tomioka Yoji also stood silently in front of Yuan Kangtai, staring at the young man in front of him who seemed to have a sick brain, although he didn't think that the man in black in front of him could hurt Yuan Kangtai. Yuan Kangtai took the initiative to take a step forward and protected the three of them behind him. The young man's body was like an electric current through the muscles, as if he had encountered some terrible evil spirit, and he looked at the boy in front of him who had not even touched the knife, and realized that he seemed to be the core of the squad. Hello, my name is Yuan Kangtai, and I hope to give more advice in the ghost-killing team in the future. Yuan Kangtai smiled and stretched out his hand to the young man in front of him. Although this stunned young man wanted to come and get his knife, he didn't give anyone a dismount, because outside they represented his own teacher, and they were all members who contributed to the slaying of ghosts, and he thought that such a trivial matter could be endured. The young man stared at the white fox mask hanging from Yuan Kangtai's waist and showed a contemptuous smile, who should I be? It turns out to be the waste apprentice taught by the previous waste-water pillar. As he spoke, he began to count his fingers, 1, 2, 3. 12 waste apprentices, ha 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 ha, that old man taught so much, and none of them passed the trial, what a waste. Let me think. They. Young man pointed his finger at them again, 11, 12, 13. Yuan Kangtai shook his hand expressionlessly, if he was not facing a person but a ghost at this time, this distance would not be as simple as breaking a finger. He actually dared to insult Master Scales. If it weren't for the fact that they were in the selection of the Ghost Slayer team, he really wanted to hack this brain-dead to death with a single sword. He stretched out his hand to stop the crowd who wanted to continue to do it, and the young man's insulting words made the always good-tempered Genho angry, and the dull hair on his head jumped angrily. Tomioka looked at the young man indifferently. If you get lucky this time, I will challenge you, and you will be at your own risk. Yuan Kangtai looked at the young man who was holding his fingers and showed a murderous smile. Say your name. They. Young man almost squeezed out 2 words from between his teeth. Miao Yu. Yu looked at the 3 of them with a resentful expression. He realized that this time he had encountered a hard stubble, which was not something he could provoke now, so he decided to find an opportunity to retaliate against them in the future. Yes, there will be a period in the future. Try not to die on the mountain. Yuan. Kangtai led everyone to the mountain. 24. When night fell, the cries of insects gradually sounded in the grass on the mountain, and a few scattered fireflies flickered in the night sky, providing the only light for those who went up the mountain. There was a soft sound, and a demon with an arm full of spikes died under Yuan Kangtai's knife again, and then a black bead burst out. Yuan Kangtai remembered the last time he asked teacher Liang Long about the use of this kind of bead. The old man was vague, but said that it could probably restore qi and blood to the body. And he didn't dare to try it at will during the usual training, so he continued to carry the beads in his arms, and I heard the old man say that there is no such record in history, and only the evil ghosts who died in the hands of Yuan Kangtai seem to be able to leave the beads. At this time, Zhenhu's slightly complaining voice sounded, Mrs. Kang, you are like this again, you will kill the evil ghost in seconds when you meet, and we will not be able to train after you. Yuan Kangtai scratched his head. He said embarrassedly, at that, I'm not afraid that you will be injured, there are more opportunities to kill ghosts in the future, so it's important to pass the assessment first. Not true. It's rare that Makoto doesn't agree with Gen Soda's point of view. Without this training, can we always follow you when we kill ghosts? In that case, what's the point of us taking the assessment? It will also bring you a lot of pressure. Mako's little face was wrinkled, obviously a little dissatisfied with Gen Kangtai's machismo. The rabbit also came with a knife in his hand at this time. Zhenhu is right, you can't protect us for the rest of your life, why don't we separate and finally gather at the top of the mountain, and we have all learned a lot from you, this place will not be too dangerous. Tomioka Yoshiyuki also nodded slightly in agreement. During this time he was like a treasure knife that had been tempered for thousands of years, and the whole person seemed calm and restrained. In that case, let us separate as you say. Yuan Kangtai said. Then he looked at the 3 of them with a serious face. But you have to remember that if you really encounter an evil ghost that you can't fight, you must try to run away, and the most important thing is to survive, and if you really reach the scene where you can't escape, you will make a big noise, and I will rush back immediately when I hear it. After all 3 agreed, a few dodges left the place. Yuan Kangtai watched the direction of Zhenhu's departure, and walked towards the top of the mountain unhurriedly. He had this confidence, he didn't have to dodge the attack of the ghost like others, and the ghosts who blocked him on this road would die one by one under his knife. In the dense forest, which Yuan Kangtai couldn't see, a demon dressed in grey lowered his head and reported to the figure on the stake. Are you sure it's him? A majestic voice came from above. The grey-clothed demon raised his head. Sure, my blood ghost technique has made me feel the smell of ape, mermaid and Minoru Tomoto in his body, and I'm sure that 3 of your subordinates died at his hands. They. Figure on the stake stood up and threw the bloodied head in his hand to the waiting demons, whose head had been dismembered by the demons with a terrified expression before he died, apparently pleased with the fresh food. The ground was littered with severed arms, thighs and broken knives, as if someone had carried out a massacre here. The black figure stretched his body to the fullest. Let's go meet that boy for a while, and see if my strength can go up a few more rankings after eating him. There was a hint of joy in his colored eyes, as if he was cheering for the food that was coming, and several terrible numbers were reflected in his pupils. Yoshiyuki Tomioka kept running to the east, the easiest place to get in touch with the sun, and he was going to get there before the sun rose, and he decided to spend his 7 days in that place. In fact, Tomioka is not as calm as he seems. He remembers that when he was 13 years old, he first worshipped under the door of Master Scale, and became friends with his own unrelated rabbit. When he was cultivating in the narrow foggy mountains with the rabbit, he often said the frustrating words of "it's better to die on his sister's behalf," and he was slapped by the rabbit. Tomioka touched his left cheek and smiled faintly. He remembered what the rabbit had said to him at that time, "If you say this kind of thing again, I will break off your friendship. You have to take your sister's hope and live well, you can't die in place of her, you have to avenge her." His expression became resolute, and he was right, it was a coward's sign to escape, and all he had to do was to cut off the head of the man behind all this. The sound of the whistling wind blew in front of him. "There is a situation." Tomioka grabbed the hilt of the knife for the first time, and slashed to the left with a bang. A faint stream of blood flowed down the blade of his sword, and he slashed at the demon. The demon had a white horn on its head, and its eyes were red, and it stared at Tomioka like a rattlesnake. "You are that kid's companion, our leader has spoken, and he wants to bring your body back, so that kid can also feel the loss of his companion." Tomioka Yoshiu's pupils constricted slightly when he heard what the demon said. He didn't know where the words came from, and instinctively told him that this time the rules seemed to have been changed by a strange ghost. He shook his head and didn't think about it, the tip of his knife pointing at the demon. The breath of water begins with the first form. To the west. He was leaning against a big tree, he had just saved a boy who was crying in tears, and seemed to be frightened by the immortal nature of the evil spirit. At that time, he rested against a tree, and watched the boy who was chased by the ghost jump off the tree and cut off the ghost's head with a single sword. The young man glanced at him, did not thank him, and ran down the mountain in a panic. Wanting to remind him that there might be more evil ghosts under the mountain, the rabbit looked at the distant figure and sighed silently. "Forget it, take care of yourself first. There are no living creatures around, and the rabbit is trying to rest." Bang! The trunk shook, and the rabbit was startled, and in an instant he entered the state of battle. He searched for the source of the sound, and looked down to see a demon with a baseball bat striking the trunk of a tree, which he smashed into a huge dent. The rabbit hurriedly jumped down. The demon smiled hideously. "The leader asked for your boy's corpse by name. I don't know if you died under my baseball bat and didn't have a whole corpse, the leader won't blame me. I can't understand a word of what you're talking about. Can you speak human words? Oh, I forgot, you're not human, ha ha ha." The rabbit taunted him mercilessly, holding the hilt of the knife with one hand. The aqua-blue sphere began to take shape around him. Fused with the breath, thunder balloon, and surge current field. Near the water source, Genhu was dipping her silk handkerchief in the water, carefully wiping her face. She had been on the road for so long, and she didn't want to be like this the next time she saw Yuan Kangtai. The light in the water began to slowly deepen, as if something was about to burst out. Before the real mushroom could react, a black shadow fish jumped out and pounced on the unsuspecting real mushroom. 25. Breathing sounded, and the demons nearby heard the inaudible sound. The girl who was supposed to be unable to dodge fled to a distance of 3 meters away from him like a broken frame, dodging the mortal blow. Masu gasped slightly, beads of sweat gradually appeared on her head. This blow she didn't expect at all, and she could only use one quick breath in a short time. Without any time to prepare, she only moved a distance of 3 meters before stopping. That's what it takes to fight the demons. He doesn't wait until you're completely ready. Surprise is their favorite way, insidious, cunning, one-hit killing. This also allowed Makoto to see their true colors. At the beginning, a few people watched Yuan King kill one ghost after another too easily, and they also felt that this ghost was nothing more than that. It wasn't until this moment that she understood the huge gap between them and Gen Kangtai. Genhu slowly pulled out the knife. Her spike-like knife was like a writhing snake. This was the soft sword that Master Scales specially built for her in order to take care of her. Although this sword is not suitable for the kind of knife technique of slashing vigorously, it has a flexibility that ordinary knives cannot match in stabbing, pumping, and winding. Mako began to use her breathing technique, and white air flowed into her body, and as the blood flow increased, her vision became clearer. The breath of water, the type of one, changed, and the water dancing. Soft knife continued to swing, bringing up water blades in the air that would not die, and while the toes hit the ground, the real mushroom actually took the initiative to rush towards the evil ghost. The water blade continued to cut through the demon's body, and bright red blood continued to flow out, and Mako realized that this level of attack did not seem to be effective in harming the demon. The demon opened his eyes after the initial pain, and with a painful joy on his face, he saw that the wound cut by the real mushroom was slowly healing, at a speed visible to the naked eye. He reached out to grab the real mushroom's weapon, to take it. Just as the demon grasped the soft sword tightly with his severed and bloody hand, it seemed that in the next second he would be able to seize control of the knife. At this moment, the force coming from the knife became smaller, and a white airflow began to appear on Mako's body, and she used a new breath. The third type of fingertips that Makoji used to breathe quickly flashed behind him in an instant. Looking at the girl who abandoned the knife and left, a triumphant smile appeared on the devil's face. Do you want to escape, little ghost? Have you ever asked me if I will agree? But there was a smile of pity on Mako's face. 3, 2, 1. Mako counted the numbers softly, and the demon who was running towards her with the knife suddenly stiffened, and his face was full of disbelief. He threw down Mako's knife, knelt on the ground and pinched his neck. The green tendons on the forehead burst out, the brain began to dizzy, and the wound that had healed showed a state of ulceration at this time. Damn imp, what did you put on the knife? The demon's eyes were full of bright red bloodshots, and an abnormal purple intent began to appear. Of course it's wisteria flowers, the poison used to deal with evil spirits. The dose I smeared on it is enough to make you lose all your combat effectiveness, but I didn't expect you to stupidly take my knife, which was all stained with wisteria flower juice by me. Really said lightly. The demon's body is constantly festering, and the other half is constantly rebuilding, as if to take this opportunity to expel all the venom of the wisteria flower. Makoto was also amazed at the recovery ability of the ghost in front of him. To be on the safe side, she picked up her knife and slashed the demon head. She slowly walked to the lake and sighed, what a horrible evil ghost, but fortunately I smeared wisteria juice on it in advance. She wiped her hand, which was trembling slightly from the first time she had slain a demon. In the open space to the east, Tomioka put his sword into its sheath at this time, and the evil spirit slowly dissipated like quicksand behind him. The Tomioka Yoshi of this world is not cowardly frightened by evil ghosts like in another timeline, and has seen what Genkangtai taught him to be a real strong man, plus his unparalleled understanding. He simply killed the demon who wanted to take his body back, and he frowned and looked in the direction of the top of the mountain, realizing that this time there seemed to be something else going on. He decided to change his direction and make peace with Yuan Kangtai and the others early. In the western jungle, there are smashed trees everywhere, and the demon with the baseball is fighting with the rabbit in close quarters at this time, and both sides are not in good shape. The devil's baseball bat was only a short section at this time, and he was covered in blood, and there were countless small wounds on his body, but he did not heal the wounds like other ghosts. Because he no longer has the spare physical strength to recover his body, he can only drag this body full of scars and continue to fight with the young man in front of him. And the rabbit is definitely not in a good state at this time. His left shoulder is exposed, and there is a scratch mark on it, which is just in order to avoid the fatal grasp of the evil ghost. He used his shoulder to bear it. The rabbit was gasping for breath at this time, and his physical strength was a little lacking because he used too many moves, but his face was full of joy and even excitement. He enjoyed the thrill of fighting with the evil spirit. In fact, he could have killed the evil ghost a long time ago, as long as he used the trick that Yuan Kangtai taught him. He believed that the evil ghost in front of him would not be able to resist this power. But he knew that he couldn't do this, because it was only the first day, and the physical exertion of using that move was particularly high, and he would be exhausted if he used it now. He didn't want to just kill a powerful demon and die on other imps. He gripped the hilt of his sword with his right hand and looked at the demon in front of him. This is the last cut to solve you. The rabbit arched and fired like a cannonball, twisting its blade and slashing at the demon's neck. Brush the head flew high, and the demon's face still showed a touch of incredulity, and the last thought in his heart was, why are people related to that young man so strong? The rabbit leaned against a tree and gasped violently, and he wiped the sweat from his head. Boom! Boom! As if an earthquake sounded, the rabbit felt the ground shake, and a little ghost who was hiding behind and wanted to give the rabbit a fatal blow was carried out by a big hand. The rabbit hurriedly stood up and immediately entered the battle state, and countless grass and mud horses ran through in his heart. There are really little ghosts. But the rabbit saw that the little ghost was lifted by the giant blue hand, and the body of the owner of the giant hand was as huge as a small mountain. Its whole body seemed to be covered with giant cyan hands, and the hands on its face were separated, revealing yellow eyes, and it looked indifferently at the little imp in horror. A buzzing sound rang out. Who? You are allowed to come to my territory and steal my food.
Thanks for listening.